Yeah.
Go outside.
Okay.
It will stream around 30 to 40 seconds later.
Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay. So I have to on this, right? Otherwise.
No, you don't have to on this because there are two input in mic. One is for recording streaming
Okay,
and one
okay.
is for Google
Oh.
Meet. If you don't open it, it also record your voice.
Okay.
From this room.
You- Can you hear that?
Yours was a bit low. This was better.
Ah.
This is probably a bit too far because he was standing.
Okay. We are just testing the YouTube volume, YouTube sound. Can you hear that? Oh yeah. Yeah. It has to be on.
No. Actually, just make it clear.
মর্নিং জ্যোতিষদা।
গুড মর্নিং দিদি, আপনি মোবাইলে বসেছেন কেন?
কি করব, আমার বাড়িতে কারেন্ট নেই, ওই এটা নেই, মানে ওরা বললো 6টার আগে আসবে না ইন্টারনেট।
ওহো।
আর আমার তো ডিপার্টমেন্টেও ক্যামেরা নেই, আর আজকে ডিপার্টমেন্টে কেউ আসেনি, সেই জন্য মোবাইলে বসতে হলো। মোবাইলেও তো যোগ হচ্ছিল না, তারপর হয়েছে। বাবারে, আমার তো ভয় লেগে গেল।
চেয়ারপারসন না থাকলে কি করে হবে?
আরে চেয়ারপারসন,
বরাত নেই তো শাদি কিসে হবে?
হেড বোধহয় জয়েন করেনি এখনো।
না, উনাকে তো দেখছি না।
হ্যাঁ, আমি একটা ফোনও করেছিলাম, ফোন ধরলো না।
Just make them sure that the recording is started.
Okay. Okay.
Ram Singh is here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Shagota,
হ্যাঁ,
everybody.
আমার তো একেবারে ঘরোয়া লুক, ওই জন্য একদম ভিডিও অফ করে রাখছি। খুব মানে এম্বারাসিং সিচুয়েশন।
তোমার সর্দি লেগেছে একটু?
প্রচন্ড, আমি তো জ্বর জারি সর্দি কাশিতে ভুগে মানে এখন
Good.
একটু বেটার, মানে
Good afternoon, everyone.
একটু কথা বলতে পারছি। Yeah,
Now
good
the
morning.
program, the screen is live streaming in YouTube, and it is a very encouraging news to inform to all of our participants that yesterday the YouTube viewers were 390 in YouTube channel. Yes, 390. So that was
That's
a very great
fantastic.
success. Yeah.
Congratulations
Thank you. Congratulations
to all of you.
the Department of
To the
Philosophy,
wonderful
North Bengal University.
Your effort, your effort. You are at the computer center again?
Yes, we are.
Is waiting now. Just complete this one.
Okay.
Sorry. Can we start?
Sure, stop.
Okay, good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to the day 2 of the World Philosophy Day 2020-21. To begin our program, I would like to thank all the participants, particularly the resource person, Professor Aditya Mohanty and Dr. Swami. And also I would like to welcome our respected colleagues. And there are many research scholars I can see online, students from both semester, third and first semesters. So I welcome each and everyone to the second day of the first session of the second day. And this program will be live streamed in YouTube like yesterday. And whatever we are doing here, whatever is happening here is live streamed in YouTube. And I just welcome once again to all of you. And today in the first session of the day 2, we have our resource person, Professor Aditya Mohanty, adjunct philosopher, the Department of Philosophy, Tripura University. He is a renowned professor of philosophy. We are very happy to have you, sir, have you here in our program, sir. And to chair this program, we have our dear Professor Devika Saha, who will be chairing the session. I would like to thank Professor Devika Saha for accepting our request to chair this program, though she was informed at the very last hour, but despite our request in the last hour, she accepted our request. Thank you so much. Now to begin the session, I would entrust our chairperson, Professor Devika Saha, to take over and to start the session. Thank you so much. Over to you, ma'am. Unmute. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. A very good morning to all of you. And Professor Mohanty, I am so very happy that we are again meeting to webinar. And I think it's on last we made here only in a college function, as far as I remember. And now I am so very lucky to be here as a moderator. So very good morning to Professor Mohanty. And I think as a renowned philosopher in our group, I must welcome you, sir, also. And I think your talk will be a very good resource for all of us. And I hope that your lecture will enrich us in every aspect. So thank you, Professor Mohanty. And I think I must add that it is a very what I will say, a very bad situation for all of us as we cannot meet personally. But I hope the situation will be over very soon, and we will be lucky to have you in midst of us. So I am requesting Professor Mohanty to just present his lecture, as our students and we also are waiting very impatiently to hear his resourceful thought. Okay, sir. Over to Professor Aditya Mohanty, sir.
Namaskar to all of you. Sorry that I was out of the screen for some time because of the problem of connectivity here at Bhubaneswar. Let us hope that I'm audible to you. Am I audible to you?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So, friends, namaskar to all of you, and I really feel privileged and honored to be part of this academic event, and especially with the faculties of North Bengal who are hosting the event, because I always feel at home when I'm at North Bengal because of the warmth of hospitality of the academia there and the keenness with which they receive the faculties from outside. This has been my repeated experience with North Bengal Department of Philosophy. Now, I have been asked to share my considered views and reflections on Sri Aurobindo, the synthesis of East and West. Now, by any reckoning, Sri Aurobindo stands out very prominent, very conspicuous among the contemporary thinkers. He is singled out in terms of the fact that he tries to integrate the monistic reflection of the East, especially Vedanta, with the gross materialism of the West. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Advaita metaphysics, you find that it does not recognize any antithesis between matter and consciousness. There is nothing like pure matter, because the singular consciousness, that is Brahman, has expressed itself or does express itself in form of varieties, in form of the phenomenal diversities. Now, the analogy that illustrates this metaphysical point is this: that as one clod of clay takes different forms in form of different parts, serving different purposes, it is one Brahman which has become many. Ekam Bhausham, it has not created many by being outside it, but it has become many. So that which is construed as pure consciousness in its unmanifest state appears as a phenomenal diversities that we encounter as the world. So the so-called world is nothing but the explicit or the manifest form of that which is otherwise unmanifest or implicit. This is the basic Vedantic Advaitic vision that also tempers the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. The philosophy of Sri Aurobindo is securely grounded in Advaita metaphysics of monism. But by and large, people tend to misconstrue the Vedantic perception or vision that Brahmasat Jagat Mithya. The world is illusory. Just as the dream is realized to be illusory when you wake up, the moment the Brahman knowledge dawns on a person, the world of diversity is also, sense of diversity disappears. Sense of diversity disappears. The world doesn't disappear. The same world is seen differently, is experienced differently. That which otherwise appeared to be antithetical, things which appear to be different, disparate, heterogeneous, appear as homogeneous, one, unitary. That is the transition from ignorance to knowledge. This seminal vision, seminal Advaitic vision, is incorporated by Sri Aurobindo in his metaphysics, in his theory of evolution, in his concept of integral yoga or integralism. But what is the distinctive character of his articulation? Let us try to come to grips with that. Now, by taking the cue from this fundamental or the seminal vision of Advaita, he maintains that if it is the one which has become many, the many that appears as the phenomenal diversity is also real. If the one lump of clay has become different ornaments, the ornament made up of gold is also real insofar as it is made up of gold. Yes, it is a fact that the form is not real, but there is a substantial identity between a lump of gold and the golden ornaments which are made out of it. Since it is the same primordial consciousness which reappears or appears as the world of diversity, the world of diversity is also equally real. So the so-called matter is not really material, it is spiritual at the core. So there is no break or discontinuity between consciousness and matter. There is no discontinuity or break between matter and consciousness, between the world of particulars, the world of space and time, and Brahman. They're continuous. But they appear to be different. They appear to be different because to the ignorant minds. Those who mistake the form to be real, they are under bondage, they are under ignorance. But if once we understand that the so-called form or a particular is nothing but an expression of the universal, that is Brahman, pure consciousness, then the same thing is looked differently because everything looks divine, everything is Brahman, everything is consciousness, everything is sacrosanct, everything is pure, everything is noble. No one is an alien, everyone is my kindred. So our relationship with the world undergoes metamorphosis, change, transformation. And it is said that for a person who is established in this supreme knowledge, for him, the poison, behaviorally, the nectar and poison become same. The poison becomes nectar, just as happened in case of Mirabai. Mirabai is not a mythical figure, it's an historical figure. Just as the wild elephant, which was said to kill Lord Buddha, bows down his trunk when there is eye contact between the wild drunken elephant and Lord Buddha. So look at, see how when you change, the world also changes because you stand related in an altogether different manner. The relationships undergo difference. How does? And Jesus, while being crucified, being nailed on the cross, how come that? He's making an advocacy in favor of those who are nailing him on the cross. They are the people who made him run with the cross, such a frail body, carrying the cross and being slighted and beaten and slashed. Look at his composure and say, God, forgive them. This is empathy. This is sense of identification. This is how you relate yourself with the world when you are established in that supreme state, supreme consciousness. Call it any name you like. In different frameworks, this figures differently under different denominations. The denominations could be different, but the experience that substantiated, that is universal. So Sri Aurobindo objects, tries to revise the so-called spiritualism and materialism. Those who think that pure consciousness is the only reality, the world is illusory in the sense of the term, they are mistaken. If it is a fact that Brahman has become the world, so it is the expression of Brahman in different form. If I have made different kinds of sweets from sugar, so when I take the sweets, I know that I am taking the same sugar in a different blend, different configuration. I'm taking the sugar. So that is why anything made up of sugar is bound to taste sweet. Anything made up of glass is bound to be brittle, because glass is brittle. So anything made up of glass is brittle. If wood is consumed by the flames, a wooden furniture also will have the properties of the wood, because it is made up of wood only. If wood is consigned to flames, it burns. So a wooden furniture, if it's consigned to flame, it also starts to ashes, because it's basically the wood. Gold dissolves in aquaresia. So a golden ornament, if it is put in aquaresia, it is bound to dissolve. A salt dissolves in water. So a salt doll also will dissolve in water. Why? Because it retains the properties of the original, the primordial substance. So if the world is nothing but a different expression of Brahman, the consciousness, pure consciousness, so every expression of it gives me an invitation to discover the core, the Brahman, the consciousness. Everything is potentially God. This is Vedantic perspective. If everything is an expression of the consciousness, so everything is a potential consciousness. So the so-called matter, a piece of stone, inert stone, or a piece of wood, dry wood, does also possess consciousness at the core and does have a psyche. Because anything which is potential conscious, it is also potential psychic. So in Vedantic canvas, there is no antithesis between consciousness and matter. It is not a difference of kind, but difference of degree. This is precisely what is captured in Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics. The so-called matter is nothing but a form of consciousness. And because it is potential conscious, the matter is potential conscious, it is subject to the evolution. It evolves into life system, again evolves into psychic system, then supermind, again goes back to the state from where it has its origin. True to his Vedantic conviction, you can summarize Sri Aurobindo's metaphysics in three fundamental propositions, namely, the beginning is one. The world of diversities has its genesis in the one. And the second proposition is, the world of diversities has its culmination, consummation, termination, or termination in the one. And the third is, the origin and the destination, they are not different, they are also one. It can be summed up in three distinct propositions, that the world of diversities has its genesis or beginning or origin in the one, which is of the nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda. Aurobindo calls it existence, consciousness and bliss. Same thing corresponds to tripartite terminology in Vedanta, Sat, Chit and Ananda. And how does the world come into existence? It comes into existence because of the self-will of that supreme stance to become many, Ekom Bhausha. You find a parallel, a very point-to-point parallel between Aurobindo's metaphysics and Vedantic metaphysics. What is the difference? Because he does not discount the world as unreal. So how can it be unreal? If it is an expression of the real, if it is an expression or form in which real appears, so it is real within. Essentially, it is real. Essentially, it is real. So he objects to spiritual is a denial of matter. You cannot say matter is unreal because matter is nothing but an expression of the real consciousness. The world of phenomenalities which you encounter in a day-to-day life, it is nothing but varied forms, varied names of the same thing. We take sweets in form of rasgulla, in gulab jamu, and so many sweets. We wear the same ornament, gold in different forms, or earring and bangles and ring and all that, but it's all out and out gold only. So if you look at the world from this perspective, then the world of phenomenality, the world of diversities, the world of names and forms are also real. It cannot be discounted as unreal. So he objects to spiritualist, denial of real, the matter. There is no antithesis between matter and consciousness. Rather, matter is the gross form of consciousness. It is a form in which the consciousness resides and inhabits. So consciousness inhabits everything. Bhagavad Gita, they call it Kshetrajna. The Purushottama resides as Kshetrajna in every Kshetra, in body and mind complex. The body-mind complex, which is made up of Sattva, Raja, and Tama, the gunas of Prakriti, they constitute the habitat in which the Kshetraga resides, the consciousness resides. So body-mind, it provides a habitat. Sri Aurobindo will go a step forward in trying to reinterpret. It's an invitation to look at Vedanta from this perspective, that the so-called names and so-called gunas of Prakriti are also essential conscious, because consciousness has its pan-existence. Pan means it exists everywhere, permeates everywhere. Sarvam Kaluidam Brahma. So Aurobindo first of all says that a spiritualist should accept everything as real. The difference between matter, mind, and consciousness is one of degree. Obviously, it's a play of creation, play of consciousness. And at the same time, in the same breath, with the same strength, with the same rigor, he also objects to materialist denial of consciousness, spirit. Because he says, the matter, which the so-called matter, which is said to be existing in space and time, which is available to our sense perception and reason, on which the scientists depend or rely upon, experience and reason. Anything which is not amenable to experience and reason is discounted as unreal. Sarvi says no, because the experience has its native limitations. You cannot see the twinkling star, the nature of these distant stars and galaxies. You take the aid of a telescope. But friends, telescope has also its limit. Suppose a telescope can make you see 2 million light years, but beyond that it cannot see. I cannot see as such with my naked eyes beyond 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers. My telescope aids my perception by making me see things which are located or situated, say, 1 million kilometers away. What is happening? I can see the star and the Saturn. But what about the planet which exists beyond solar system? The other part of the galaxy, which is distant by some billions of light years. Scientists are not in a position to give a conclusive testimony or observation about the universe, because the universe, we do not know how big is the universe. Now there is a great saying that a whale frog is distanced by space, is limited by space. and a summer bird is limited by time. A well frog is born in the well and dies in the well. So his vision of the world is limited by the well, where he lives and dies. And a summer bird is limited by time because it appears in summer and disappears in summer. Friends, the aids of perception have also its limit. My eyes have, naked eyes have its limitation. The telescope has its limitations, depending on the power of the glass of the telescope. Sri Aurobindo would say, friends, we are limited by our experience because the experience as the instruments, our gyanendriyas, the sense organs, have their native limitations. And so too are the aids. So do the visual aids which help me to see still distant objects. How do you know how big is the universe unless you go across it? Have you crossed beyond the solar system? They are at best trying. I have sent them, unmanned craft to Saturn. It took few years. Now it has taken a selfie from Saturn. And what is the position of the Earth? A blinking spot. You are not able to identify it. That is the position of Earth in relation to Saturn. What about the galaxies and billions of galaxies which are distanced by billions of light years? Human mind cannot conceive. So unless I go out of the house, how do I know how big is the house? Suppose I'm sitting in a room which is 126 storied. I've never gone out. How can I say how tall it is? So unless you go out of the universe, how do you judge how big is the universe? So our knowledge, the equipment, the cognitive apparatus has its own limitations. Aurobindo says it puts a limit to what we can know by experience and reason. And scientists who rely on experience and reason, thinking that they're absolute, are grossly wrong, mistaken. Because the real knowledge consists in knowing the limitation of our instruments. I give you the example, the maxim. A well frog is limited by space. It cannot know what is there beyond the well. How big is the universe? And a summer bird is limited by time because it appears in summer. It does not live to see the biting cold of winter or the shower of the rain. It comes in summer and disappears in summer. Does not know what came before and what came after. That is a native limitation of the summer bird. Similarly, Aurobindo would say that human experience or your knowledge available through sense experience is limited because of the native limitations of the sense organs. And similarly is the reason. Reason is a discursive in nature. By reason, you know many things, but that which helps you know things also limits your knowledge. By telescope, you see distant objects, but that also limits your perception because you can see only up to 10,000 kilometers or 15 million kilometers, not beyond that. So the aids of perception have their limitations. By that, they impose limitations on what you know. It has been nicely said that the more you know, how little you know. This is what Socrates said. This is what Newton says. I have only collected some pebbles from the shore when the vast knowledge of a ocean lies. So the more you know, the more you are in a position to map your ignorance. Yes, that is why a really knowledgeable person becomes humble. Because the more and more you know, the more and more you are aware of your ignorance, range of ignorance, your boundary of ignorance. Sri Aurobindo says, the highest feat of reason consists in drawing a limit to reason. This is what Kant also said. Reason must realize its limitations. Reason must, Kant says, look, you can operate only when. If you want to make sense, you must operate within the bounds of space and time. If you apply categories beyond the spatio-temporal, you land yourself in contradictions, antinomies. That's the fate of reason. And there are a host of thinkers. Bradley would say, intellect has to commit suicide. Intellect is discursive. So he is condemned to It is condemned. The intellect is condemned to know the world of phenomenality in terms of subject and object. And by doing this, you dissect. Once you dissect, you murder. Murder in the sense, figuratively speaking, you distort the nature of reality. Bergson says that reason cannot go further. The reality can be known only in moments of integrated experience called Duryea. There are a host of Eastern and Western thinkers who try to show the limitation of reason as a faculty of knowledge. So experience and reason have their boundaries. And it rests on the wisdom of man to know how much thus far, not beyond limits. Friends, this is also an ethical injunction. This metaphysical, as also its ethical, bearing. An ethical person is one who knows its limits, his limits. Limits. We can't define it in terms of universalizability. Look, if you cannot wish everyone to do it, don't do it. That is the limit. Morality brings a limit to human thinking and behavior. How, to what extent, what kind of difference you can make to the other. So Aurobindo says that yes, experience and reason do give us knowledge, but they are utterly inadequate. They are grossly inadequate insofar as the knowledge of the spirit is concerned. For that, reason has to, reason has to get sublimated. You see, those who plead in favor of intuition, not only Sri Aurobindo, there are a host of thinkers who plead in favor of intuition as a veridical source of knowledge. But what about the intuitive knowledge? Does it negate experience, knowledge through experience? No. It supplements. So faith or intuition does not negate the claims of reason, but supplements the claim of reason. Thus far, no further. Rajani says that reason is like a ladder. Maybe when you climb beyond it, it is no more. You have to give it up. You have to leave it, so go beyond it. If one who dives in the, those who dive, they use the springboard as the base. But it is used as a base so that they go into the air and dive. So experience and reason do help us. Because if you give up reason, you run into dogma. There is a risk of running into dogma, you give reason. But reason has to be faithfully followed. And reason itself will reveal its limitations. And reason will draw its own limit. So when reason draws its own limit saying, thus far, no further, it makes room for intuition. So intuition is not irrational, but is irrational. So intuition refers to not negation of reason, but sublimation of reason. Sri Aurobindo says that experience, reason, and intuition, there is no break, there is a continuity. This is one of the very fundamental messages in Sri Aurobindo. The trans-phenomenal does not negate the phenomenal, but is continuous with the phenomenal. So the worldly existence is not negation of the divine knowledge, but it is a stepping stone. It helps you, just like a springboard helps the diver to go into the air. Similarly, the world is not a hindrance, but an opportunity to cultivate knowledge and enlightenment. This is one thing. So there is a clear integration of experience, reason, and intuition. He said that when you look from this perspective, the world of matter will appear different. Because spirit pervades matter. Matter is nothing but an expression of spirit. So there cannot be any denial of matter by the spirit, nor denial of spirit by the matter, exponents of matter. It is based on the simple cognition or perception or the conviction that it is the same reality which percolates, which permeates every form of existence. This is brought about in his concept of involution and evolution, creation. Very much in consonance with the Vedantic dictum, Ekam Bhausham. That means it is all religions. In Christianity also, they say, God said, let there be light, there was light. So the world came into existence because of the will of the God. But the relations is different. There, God makes the world being outside it. Here, God himself, Brahman himself has become the world. One becomes the many. One doesn't create the many by remaining outside. That is the only difference. But in almost all cosmologies, the universe is traced to the will of the one to create many or become many. One to many. Even the proponents of Big Bang theory, they say that the universe had a beginning in a dimensionless point with a Big Bang. And from that point, what is that point of singularity? Dimensionless. There's no space, then there's no time, because there's no event. All the four forces didn't come into existence. So the singularity has given rise to the multiplicities. And it is an expanding universe, and there will be a crunch. Again, the multiplicity will come to a point of singularity. So in the scientific account also, the world is a vast, these billions of stellar bodies, the 15 billion years ago, they had beginning from a point. There is a book I smote, The Universe Out of Nothing. That one contains the potentiality of the whole. And Leibniz says that every monad mirrors the whole universe. In the sense that a big tree is contained in a seed. A big scientist is contained in a zygote in mother's womb, uterus, at the time of conception. Similarly, the whole universe, plurality is contained in singularity. We are not going into that those cosmologies, but there is an underlying agreement. One to many, many to one. So, this, he says that pure existence is unmanifest. You use this word, Shiva and Shakti, pure concept. Existence, calls it existence. Now, when it creates, it takes the form of force, consciously equated force. That's a very famous statement. When I always a great lamented, and the former my teacher, one of the veterans in the field of philosophy, Professor Rudandra used to say. One day, I still remember, when I think of it, tears come to my eyes. Because we are what we are because of his mentorship, academic mentorship. Purusha, in Sri Aurobindo framework, he was a great Sri Aurobindite. Prakriti tells Shiva, Purusha. Purusha and Prakriti, Shiva and Shakti, all these are, they are correlates. Prakriti tells Purusha, without you, I exist not. But without me, you are unmanifest. Prakriti tells Purusha that without me, people will not know you. People know you because I am there, because I make you manifest. But I know that without you, my existence is not there. Without you, I exist not. But without me, you are unmanifest. But are they different? Now, in Sri Aurobindo, we find a rare effort to integrate dualism into monism. Because dualism has its own limitations. If Purusha and Prakriti are different, how is it that Purusha and Prakriti came together in a third entity? And how is it that the third came to connect Purusha and Prakriti, the fourth entity? Infinite grace. Means inconclusive explanations. Every dualistic metaphysics suffers from this inconclusiveness of explanation. But Sri Aurobindo, we find that Prakriti is not different from Purusha. Shakti is not different from Shiva. In Ananda Sutra meditation, Shakti says Shiva is Shakti. When the same entity appears as the world of names and force, it appears as Prakriti in its creative force. So Prakriti is the creative force of Purusha. It's not different from Purusha. So dualism is not theoretically, logically maintainable because you cannot explain the relationship between the Sankhyayites give 2-3 types of analogies. They said reflection, it is a reflection, then a proximity, sannidhi, then sanjogo, then sanjoga bhasa. All these explanations fail in the long run. How is it? How come that Purusha and Prakriti came to an effective relationship so that there is a world? And we find in Sri Aurobindo that the Prakriti or the Shakti is not different from Shiva, but it is a conative expression. Conative means will. It wills the world into existence. Is it consistent on the part of consciousness to will? Yes. Because consciousness can do 3 things. cognition, connection, affection. It can know, it can will, it can feel. So it is very much consistent of pure consciousness to have willed the universe into existence. And what happens? So it is the world is the result of self-limitation of the Supreme, self-fragmentation of the Supreme. So this one appears as many, and the one becomes the many. So in the process, the one descends into or enters into different forms, names and forms, the world that we encounter. So everything is potential conscious. Everything is potential psychic. And what happens? Now the process of crudification from subtle to gross, gross to grosser, gross to grossest is matter. So matter is different from consciousness in respect of the form, because it's the grossest form of matter. That means consciousness exists in a gross form, is called matter. It is the other name of consciousness. You can take an analogy. What is the difference between hydrogen, oxygen, and water? Water and ice, same constituent. In solid state is ice, in liquid state is water, and gaseous is hydrogen, oxygen. So when the states become different, we give different names, denominations for. So consciousness in a gross form is called matter. So matter is essential, nothing of consciousness. So consciousness plunges into, this is called the plunge. This word is used in Sri Aurobindo's, Life Divine and the Savitri. Plunge of consciousness into matter. So the so-called matter is essentially conscious. Consciousness confined, self-confined. So there is a tendency of the immanent consciousness to again liberate itself from the confines of matter, self-bondage. I decide to bind myself, then I unbind myself. It is a kind of binding and winding and unwinding. So the involution refers to the way or dynamics by which the consciousness descends into matter. And evolution is the process by which the matter ascends into the original state from where it has come. So involution and evolution, they are not contradictory, but they make a cosmic cycle. Involution refers to the dynamics of the process by which the consciousness becomes increasingly grosser and grosser till it becomes grossest. And from there, the onward again, the backward march starts. Human beings stand in between. We are stand midway. The average humanity is in the level of mind. Or Sri Aurobindo says you have to evolve further. You have to negotiate the gap between manhood and Brahmahood through supermind and all these dynamics as explained. Now, how come matter evolves into life? And life evolves into mind, mind into supermind, then into again back to the unmental state. It is a process of, there are some other cosmologists said that the cosmic hub attracts. It's just like in Upanishads, they say the spider spins out the web, again it draws it onto itself. See, the world is the self-projection. That way also you can see it is a self-projection of the divine. And the evolution nothing but withdrawal of the multiplicity into its own bosom. We are in the process of the backward journey. Christians call it homecoming. Homecoming. We are returning to our permanent habitat, which is the state of Satchit and Ananda. Now matter evolves into life, life into mind, because they are already there. It can be also substantiated, Asata Karanat, Sankhya arguments, that unless this oil is there in the oil seed, you can't get it. Oil seed comes out of oil because it's already there, immanent, potentially there. 1,000 oilmen cannot get oil from the sand because oil is not there in the sand. You cannot get yellow from blue because yellow is not there. 1,000 artists cannot bring it. Asata Karanat, Upadan Karanat, the first argument. That also substantiates Sri Aurobindo's. You see, the Orthodox, seminal thinkers, there is an agreement. The way they explain could be different. It becomes our academically our bounden duty to find the processes, to discover the processes on which different philosophical systems they stand or they're poised with their respective perspective. This is what journey thinkers say. Philosophers should work as co-travelers because each philosophy throws illumination of the same reality from its respective perspective. So same thing appears differently. Now there is a strong attempt also to find a convergence of philosophy, science, and spirituality. If truth is one, it is like a sanctum sanctorum. Philosophy, science, and spirituality approach through different gates. And Sri Aurobindo works out very nicely to help us to find the convergence. Scientists are grossly wrong in denying ontological status to spirit. And spiritualists are myopic, short-sighted in denying reality to matter. Matter does exist. It is a state in which consciousness encounters you. When you encounter the world, you are encountering the divine in a different forms. You should not forget it. So there is no alien. Everyone is a kindred. When Mirabai was offered that blend, poisonous blend, she took it as the prasad of Girdhar Gopal. It became nectar. Perchance, hypothetically, if the same person would have taken that, he would have been affected by the poisonous properties. How can, with the change of hands, the properties also change? It's a historical corroboration of the fact that if the world that you see is your own world. If your world is inhabited by enemies, ask yourself. Pause for a while, ask yourself how much you contribute. If you have no friends, you have no enemies but friends, you are also responsible for that. So that world that you see is your own world, because the world that you see is the result of your own perspectives, your categories of interpretation, tools of investigation. They determine what you are going to observe or encounter in the world. Am I trespassing the limits of time? I don't know. Somebody has to remind me, because that's no end. It is said, no, the philosophical discussions come to an end when scavengers enter the room. This philosophical questions or problems are inconclusive. Philosophical debates are also inconclusive, because you have something, he says something, you say something, and when the scavenger says, sir, it is time, I have to close the door, scavenger, then only you stop. So somebody has to remind me when I have to stop. But all that I'm trying to drive home is this, that Sri Aurobindo tries to locate or situate Vedanta in a new setting, new ontological. Ontologically, what is that? Ontological, a couple of minutes I'll take. Ontologically says that matter, the so-called matter and orchestrated consciousness, they stand on the same axis. The fundamental being, pure consciousness, pure existence. And everything else it's an expression of it. Epistemologically, different sources of knowledge like sense experience, reason, and intuition, they don't contradict one another. If I say rose is red or hydrogen make water, it cannot be discounted by spiritual cognition. At the same time, if a spiritualist says that which is called water is basically made up of some substance out of which everything is made, that is also true. If you tell your child 1 + 1 = 2, it's right. But if somebody says 1 + 1 is equal to not 2, 1 + 1 is equal to 1 + 1, because each one is unique. When you say 2 means they have the same identity. No truth in their identity. Both are true, but from two different perspectives. So Sri Aurobindo would say that experience and reason could not discount the claims of intuition, because experience and reason have their ambit, have their boundary, which they should not transgress. This is in devotional literature, Vishwasa Miliya Hari Tarke Bahudur. It has been said in a very, in a different tone and texture and tone and tenor. Vishwasa Miliya Hari Tarke Bahudur means they are saying the reason has its limit. Reason, when good sense prevails on reason, when reason reaches its zenith or height, it realizes its limitation. It should make way for reason. So intuition is not negation of reason. Rather, reason makes room for intuition. So they stand continuous. The last thing is that matter, life, mind, and consciousness, there is no break. And in this process of evolution, the past does not die. Past is not annulled, but past lives in the present, lives on to the future, in and through the present. In this sense, ethically, your mistakes also teach you. If you translate it to an ethical perspective, what about humanity? After deforestation, you realize the importance of forest. After committing mistakes, you realize, after flouting the health rules, when you fall sick, you realize the health rules. So friends, from this perspective also, all that you have been, Valmiki had every saint has a past. So every sinner has a future. Sometimes your sinful life also reminds you, in spiritual scripture, we call it Sambit. Sudden remembrance. Ratnaka remembered, oh, I have gone wrong. Bilomangal realized, I have gone wrong. So treading the path of evil also reminds you that it is evil. So friends, ethically speaking also, your past tells you, if you have a checkered past, you have a sinful past, that greatly remind you, yes, you have led a sinful life, that is, you are paying price for it, then you are reminded of the past, then you right on the path. So the path of evil also pushes you to the path of good when you pay price for evil. So all the ways lead to one goal. One is a straight route, the other is a serpentine or a circuitous route. So the ethical implication is this, that everything being even a sinner, Albert Schweitzer says, even a person, dreaded criminal of the earth, who can kill somebody for what, $10 for a glass of wine, when he comes back, he pats his head. What is that love? No one is really bad. The divinity is there, lurking in everyone. In Odia, we call it Taunsataranya. These splinters buried beneath. So everyone, even the most sinful man in this universe, has also divinity within. Therefore, he deserves our attention, not hatred. You have to pray, you have to create a conducive ambience for a sinner. If a Ratnakar could be a Valmiki, no one is condemned once for all. So everyone has to be seen as a member of your family, as a kin, as a kindred. So that makes room for the ethics of live and let live. There is no room for dichotomy, no room for animosity, no room for hatred, no room for alienation, no room for I-thou dichotomy. So given that metaphysics, which is the ethics, that is why it is called integralism. Everyone is integrated. Whether a sinner or a virtuous man, they stand on the same axis. And it is those who are more advantaged, they have a duty for the other. If you are a saint, you have a duty for a sinner, because he does not know what is good and bad. You have to play your bounden role in trying to elevate a sinner, because no one is condemned once for all. I think you are very gentle enough not to remind me of the confines of time. So I think I have, brother, I should stop, and I think we should continue. There are all. Yeah.
And we are still now to you have
Professor Sai,
Pratik is audible.
Devika Di, one
Pratik is audible.
Devika Di, we can't listen to you.
yeah, you are not properly audible. Stop.
Actually, Devika Di is using her phone. Perhaps that is why there is a certain problem.
An active in her. Most probably she is good. She is continuing.
Yeah. So
She's
Oh, better to ring her.
using a phone.
phone. If she's using
Yeah,
now she is.
Yes, I am back. In fact, my connection got lost again, and that is why I am using this my mic here now. So I think Professor
He's using double.
and so I am thanking you to give us such a nice declaration, and I think there will be question hour session also. And in fact, I saw someone has already sent, our students has already sent some of the questions, though I have not. I think one Vibhash Chakraborty, he requested to give him a chance to ask some question. So I will request Vibhash that you may ask to sir your question. Vibhash, are you here? Vibhash, I think he may not be here. So if there are any other questions from the students, you are allowed to ask directly to Professor Mohanty. Anyone from the research group or the students? I think the research scholars, you are also here. So you may ask also questions if there are any. Otherwise, I may go to my colleagues if they are ready to ask any questions or queries or any. Yes, Kea.
Yes, ma'am. May
I
I
think
ask a
Kea is.
question to sir? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, of course.
Ma'am,
Of course.
yes. Good afternoon, sir.
You may ask Mohanty. Yes. Go on.
Yes. Sir, I could not be present in the beginning of your class. So, sir, my question is that, sir, what is the meaning of integral in the philosophy of Aurobindo? If you kindly explain, yeah.
Okay. Integrate, you see, integration means presence of a heterogeneity. Suppose I say you add 2 mangoes. Adding means add one thing with the other. So there is a dichotomy, there is a duality. Similarly, integrate. Supposing you say that the salt is integrated into water. So it always presupposes 2 things. So Aurobindo's integralism becomes meaningful because of the existing dichotomy between matter and spirit. Existing dichotomy between phenomenal and transphenomenal. Rival claims of reason and intuition. So he is trying to integrate them. He says there is no dichotomy, there is no antithesis, there is no heterogeneity, there is no disparateness between matter and consciousness. The so-called matter is nothing but a form of consciousness. So the matter has to be integrated, or matter has to be understood, reinterpreted as a form of consciousness. Once you look from this perspective, the matter and consciousness, they form a hierarchy of scale. Matter, life, mind, consciousness, they refer to different rungs of the ladder. They are not different. They appear to be different, but in fact, they are different expressions of the same substance. In this sense, he is trying to integrate matter and spirit. And he is also trying to integrate monism with the pluralism. The so-called pluralism is nothing but an expression of an ignorant mind. Since our perspectives becomes myopic, since our standpoints become so narrow, so regimented, we see difference. As a matter of fact, no scientist ideally can discount the claims of an intuition, and no intuitionist can disclaim the claim of a scientist. So they need to supplement each other because they are illuminations from different perspectives. But Sri Aurobindo takes the monistic perspective from where the heterogeneities can be reconciled. This is called integration. Integrating matter with consciousness, integrating monism with pluralism or dualism. That is precisely why it is called integration. Body, mind, and spirit, they are not three, but they are threefold. They are threefold. There is one scientist says that the laws which determine or explain the physical-chemical laws in matter are different from the laws which explain human body, these biological laws, biophysical laws, or physical laws. So they appear as different, but all these operations become meaningful from a common process. That is how he is trying to lay down, he's trying to draw a fundamental canvas, a canvas against which all dichotomies, all heterogeneities, all diversities, all conflicts can be reconciled or resolved. In this sense, integralism is. Integralism
Thank you, sir.
integralism because there is a dichotomy. There was a dichotomy. It presupposes a dichotomy. Any kind of integration or synthesis.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Is there any other students or research scholars? You may ask.
NKR, I think NKR will ask.
Yeah, we said
He's getting ready to ask.
If there are no one, then research scholars. Otherwise, any colleagues, they are free to ask any question to sir. In fact, as far as I could follow, Professor Mohanty's speech is so very lucid, and he clarified all the steps so clearly, and that is the reason I think that everyone could follow his lecture very nicely, and that is the reason maybe that no one is asking any questions or queries. And I think Ramthing and our head of the department, they are both there. And if you have any questions or otherwise, I may just close this lecture.
Yeah, I think
Devika
Dr.
ji.
Nirmal. Yeah,
Yes.
Professor Das.
Devika ji.
Yes, Nirmal.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to convey my heartfelt thanks to Professor Mohanty on behalf of our department. Really, your lecture is so vivid, so lively and thought-provoking, very clear, really. Sir, I want to know one thing, that do you not think that the position of Shankaracharya has been misunderstood by us along with the scholars? Why? Because when you actually said that when Aurobindo is saying that both the spirit and the matter are true, then both of them are not true in the same sense, according to Aurobindo also. Because the consciousness or the absolute, which has been taken to be true, it is taken to be true in the ultimate sense. But when he is saying that the matter is also true, but matter is not true in the same sense, there is a difference of the degree. And if we go to Shankaracharya, then he is also distinguishing the three levels of the reality. That is Pratibhasik Sattva, Paramarthik Sattva, and Vyavaharik Sattva. So when he is saying the world is real in the empirical sense, Vyavaharik Sattva, then he is actually saying the same, I think, what is said by Rishi Aurobindo. Then what is the difference? This is what I want.
Okay. You see, you are right. essentially the same thing, but in case of if you take a Pratibhashika Satya, or you can say if you take these Vyavaharika Satya or Sata, whatever you call it, in Sri Aurobindo, that Vyavaharika Satya does not delude you. That Vyavaharika Satya also facilitates your growth. In Vedantic, pure Advaita perspective, the Vyavaharika Satya, you have to make effort to have the knowledge that it is at the core, it is supreme. But here the point is, you in the so-called names and forms, they do not hinder, they rather facilitate. It is a further rarefied form, that is called, Neo-Vedantin, a rarefied form, that means Vedanta customized into human living, human life. In the sense that suppose you are betrayed by somebody. So that betrayal also brings divine into your mind. And it is used as a stepping stone to realization that, oh, this is what human life is. So every moment in life becomes an opportunity to remember the divine. Divine, that means divine is continuous with it. Advaita Vedanta also says that. But in the empirical plane, the perspectives are little more finer and rarefied in Sri Aurobindo, that when you approach an enemy, you do not approach an enemy or opposite. Even a person who is denying Brahman is also the Brahman speaking through an opponent. You see, when you meet an opponent, this opponent is also trying to wreck up your conviction, divine conviction, by challenging it. So your opponent is also co-traveler on the path. So we should say it is not different from Vedanta, but Advaita Vedanta customized, retranslated, relived in relation to the phenomenal existence. You see, that gave rise to a distinct divide between spiritualism and materialism. You'll agree that in the world, in many quarters, the matter and consciousness are taken to be two opposite entities, ontologically different. So Sri Aurobindo is trying to show that they are integrated. Yes, theoretically also what you say is true. Theoretically what you say is true. But Aurobindo goes a step further. Even Vivekananda also is also taken to be Neo-Vedantin, because he goes a step forward in saying that if you say this, why your conviction, knowledge, why does it not percolate your behavior? Why there is poverty? What prevents you from treating Daridra as a Narayana? This is an integrating concept. And the so-called, poverty is a creation of you. Being in the land of Vedanta, how can you afford to witness the gross property, stark property? This is Vivekananda. So here Vedantic knowledge has come down from the ivory tower of discussion or scriptures to day-to-day life. So this is integrating. It is not negating Vedanta. Vedanta, which would establish an ontological framework. That is how
he's online. I don't know.
He's online.
I don't know.
If you can really find out, then we can start with after the question hour is over.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Nirmal.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Kanti.
Shudhu Bachcha, just Aditya, my voice is reachable to you?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
This is an advantage of digital window. Even though we are distant, see each other and listen to each other. So the pandemic has given us an opportunity to connect to the whole world, sitting at one place. This is an advantage.
Yeah, so extremely happy to actually share your deliberation. It is exceedingly well. But as I am a completely layman about the issue discussed, I am thinking from Western perspective, particularly from Wittgenstein standpoint. And actually, there are two limits of the world. One is that is inside and the outside. the limits of my language and the limits of my work. So within the limits, actually, our senses and reasons are functioning, and outside the limits, everything is mystical. And Wittgenstein uses the term nonsense. And Wittgenstein ends the Tractatus Logica Philosophicus with the famous remark that it is better for us to persevere in silence. So silence is a sort of acceptance as far as my understanding goes in Wittgenstein. Now coming back to your lectures about the integration of the mind and matter. Now Aditya, besides the Indian tradition, if we carefully go through the Kantian tradition, we will also see that a conscious attempt has been made to amalgamate any kind of philosophical duality that we have seen in Descartes. And Wittgenstein was profusely influenced by Immanuel Kant as well. So when you are talking about something which is mundane, which is divinity, which is spiritual, and so on and so forth, you do not have any option other than integration, because your life is beginning with matter. There is no question of doubt. But in our soul, there are some basic qualities, that is human qualities. So if we remember Plato's Republic, actually he says that is the human life is the cultivation of the quality of the soul. That is what we call virtues. So it is a process of becoming. And Martin Heidegger also makes the subtle distinction between Dasein, there being, and becoming. That is the distinction between being and capital being. So everywhere there is a process of becoming. So when you are talking about I think Aurobindo, that is the concept you use, involutions and evolutions, is a sort of tussle, so struggle to the process of becoming, that is the supermind. So what do you find is something new in Aurobindo? If you keep in mind the philosophy of Kant, the philosophy of Wittgenstein, and philosophy of others, what's your view, sir, about it?
You see, these two frameworks have their distinct presuppositions. Now, when Wittgenstein says the limit of logic is the limit of the world, Kant says that you can talk meaningfully about the phenomenal, about the phenomenon. All that they're trying to see is they're drawing a limit to intelligibility, reason. But Aurobindo, for that matter, any Vedantian would say, no, the domain of intelligibility is far beyond the domain of reason. Even though you cannot speak, even though you pass over in silence, the silence is more eloquent than language there. You see, suppose you have you are my neighbor. You are my neighbor, so I am also your neighbor. But that point which separates your land from my land doesn't belong to either you or me. That is why they say, Wittgenstein also says that death is not an event in life. Death is a limit of life, so death cannot be an event in life. The part of the limit of my land, which separates your land from my land, is neither the part of my land or your land. It's just a limit. So Kant, by saying, drawing a limit to the phenomenal, the domain of the phenomenal, he is trying to, as spoken, bounds of sense. But that is nonsense in the sense that it is beyond the reach of reason and ambit of reason. But they would say there is another faculty by which you can have comprehension of the so-called nominal, the so-called transcendental, the so-called allogical. It is not illogical. Wittgenstein say that anything illogical you have to pass over in silence. But they would submit the so-called illogicality is nothing but is allogical, beyond the logical. Anything beyond logical is illogical. It's a grotesque prejudice of reason about itself. To say that nothing can be known without reason is a grotesque prejudice of reason about itself, of reason by itself, about itself. So that is why they say that yes, whatever you said rationally is cognitively meaningful, all right, but there is another level of meaningfulness. The so-called silence has also logic. The so-called silence is also, in Upanishad it said that, there can be communication in silence. And communication in silence is more effective and eloquent than communication through language. So they are giving us, you can call it a revisionary metaphysics or whatever. It is not a revisionary metaphysics, it is a descriptive metaphysics. Because they are trying to delimit a domain where the rules of comprehension are not like that of rules of reason. Just imagine laws of logic. Imagine a world where there is only one thing, no law of logical operate. A is meaningful because there is many, which I will be discussing, as you have said, I have a paper, Logic and Beyond Logic, East and West. You are having a seminar, you told me, I am writing a paper on it. So logic, what is the limitation of logic? Logic tells us how a human mind is. They are the rules of intelligibility. If you say A is not A, what do you mean? You are you are harvesting nonsense by acting, saying contrary to laws of logic. But logic operates in the world of multiplicity. A is A. A cannot be both B and not B. These are meaningful only because there are multiplicities. They would be inoperative in the world of unicity, absolute unicity. What does it mean say A is A? When you say A, there is something not A, which exhausts the universe. A and not A exhaust the whole, mutually exclusive, but together exhaustive. That is what I would mean from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, or Vedantic perspective. There is a domain which is beyond the ambit of sense perception and rational reflection. And that world is not nonsensical, though you cannot discuss about it, be silent, but you can experience it. There is another level of experience which cannot be categorized. So it is a domain of the non-categorial, acategorial, alogical, not illogical. That is my submission.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, sir. I think we have enough discussions on this particular topic, and sir, as usual, has elaborated it so very nicely that I have nothing to say except just to accept and to keep it in our treasure house. So I think I must go back to our favorite friend and colleague Ramthing sir. Ramthing.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Mohanty sir, for your eloquent lecture. It was a wonderful lecture, a lucid explanation of Aurobindo's conception of consciousness and many other things. It was a very beautiful lecture. Thank you so much. And Professor Devika Saha, you have nicely chaired the session. We really thank you. With these few words, I now close the first session of this first session. The second session will be starting after 5 minutes. So with this, I close this first session. Thank you so very much. Thank you to all participants as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The person you have called is speaking to someone. The person you have called is speaking to someone else. You can wait or call again later.
Okay, okay, okay.
Okay. Swamiji, good morning. Oh, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Swami. Good afternoon. Yeah. Yes. Welcome to our second session of day 2 to the World Philosophy Day.
Moon, প্রথম থেকে শোন। Moon.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Welcome back to our second session of the day 2 of the World Philosophy Day. The second session begins now. To begin this session, I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Swami Methanan. He is an associate professor of philosophy, Ramakrishna Vivekananda University. We express our thanks and gratitude for accepting our invitation to be the resource person of this program. Thank you, sir. Your presence here as a resource person will truly enlighten us with your ideas. And also, I would like to thank Professor Mohanty, who was kind enough to accept our invitation and also a request to chair this session. Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to request the chairperson to kindly start the session. With this, I hand over the time. Over to you, sir.
So, am I supposed to chair the session?
Yes, sir.
Okay, namaskar to all of you. It's again a privilege to be with Swamiji, and I'm quite sanguine that the auspicious presence of Swamiji will make a difference to the academic ambience of this webinar. And so with these words, I would rather request Swamiji to share his thoughts and considered views, and which will be followed by discussion. And I'm pretty sure that he will definitely, his lecture will not only kill our academic appetite, but also nourish us with righteous thoughts, nobler thoughts, because he's different from all of us insofar as he has pledged his life, he has pledged his entire life to lead a righteous living. We have multiple identities, but he's the one who has one identity, that is an identity as a sadhak, as a sannyasi, who is out and out committed to promote the cause of humanity. So we are glad to have him in our midst. These words, I would request Swamiji to kindly present his views before the audience. Swamiji, you unmute your mic. You unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now? Is it fine?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you so much for the generous introduction, Professor Mohanty, and thank you to Nirmal Roy and Ramting for inviting me today. I look forward to the session, and thank you all for joining me. I look forward to an enlightening discussion. So what I plan to do is I'll be reading a paper. It's a shortened form of a paper that will be published in a journal in a few months. And I'll be presenting a PowerPoint presentation. So let me try to show that now first. Can you all see it? Very good. Okay, so let me begin. So the topic of my paper, the paper will go for about an hour, and then I'll open it up for discussion. So, A Great Adventure of the Soul, Sri Aurobindo's Integral Vedantic Response to the Problem of Evil. Can everyone hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay. Please carry on.
Okay. Among modern Indian thinkers, the Bengali philosopher mystic Sri Aurobindo stands out as one of the most brilliant, original, and systematic. In major works such as The Life Divine, The Synthesis of Yoga, and Savitri, Sri Aurobindo articulates a new, life-affirming spiritual philosophy grounded in his own mystical experiences, as well as in the Vedic and Vedantic traditions. On the basis of his self-described quote-unquote integral Vedantic worldview, Sri Aurobindo provides a fresh perspective on the problem of evil, the age-old question of why a loving and omniscient God would permit so much evil and suffering in the world. In The Life Divine, his philosophical masterpiece, he presents a sophisticated and highly original theodicy, which aims to explain why God allows us to suffer and to commit and experience evil. So the focus of this paper will be on Sri Aurobindo's theodicy. It's a term that was coined by Leibniz, the Western philosopher. And the theodicy is an attempt to explain why a loving God would permit so much evil in the world. So what is Sri Aurobindo's distinctive response to this problem of evil? That's what we'll be discussing today. Sri Aurobindo's theodicy has attracted a fair amount of scholarly attention. Some scholars, most prominently S.K. Maitra and Haridas Chaudhuri, have championed Sri Aurobindo's theodicy, highlighting its philosophical advantages over existing theodicies in both India and the West. However, the majority of scholars, including Stephen Phillips, L. Stafford Beatty, Beatrice Buteau, Robert Nozick, Michael McDonald, and Thomas Paglia, have adopted a more critical stance towards Sri Aurobindo's theodicy, arguing that in spite of its sophistication and promise, it is ultimately unconvincing or at best incomplete. Before we are in a position to determine how cogent and convincing Sri Aurobindo's theodicy is, we need to have a sufficiently nuanced and comprehensive understanding of all the key elements of his theodicy, as well as their interrelation. I would argue that the scholars mentioned above have focused on some of the central aspects of Sri Aurobindo's theodicy at the expense of other equally important aspects. Betty and Maitra, for instance, emphasized the theoretical implications of Sri Aurobindo's panentheistic metaphysics, while Phillips, Buteau, and McDonald focus on his doctrine of spiritual evolution. My aim here is to provide a more comprehensive examination of Sri Aurobindo's theodicy that takes into account all of its key elements. So the paper will have two parts. In part one, I will briefly outline Sri Aurobindo's philosophy of what he calls realistic Advaita. In part two, I will reconstruct Sri Aurobindo's theodicy in The Life Divine, as well as the subtle argumentative chain of reasoning by which he develops and defends his theodicy. So part one, Sri Aurobindo's philosophy of realistic Advaita. In January 1908, Sri Aurobindo, under the spiritual guidance of the yogi Vishnu Bhaskar Lele, had, in his own words, a quote, series of tremendously powerful experiences, which made him see with a stupendous intensity the world as a cinematographic play of vacant forms in the impersonal universality of the absolute Brahma, end quote. As Sri Aurobindo himself confirmed, this early experience was none other than the Advaitic Brahma-Jnana, which led him to look upon the world as an illusion, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Only a few months later, Sri Aurobindo was incarcerated for a year in Kolkata for his political activities. And after intensively practicing the sadhana of the Bhagavad Gita, he had a panentheistic mystical realization of Vasudeva as everything and everyone, including the prisoners, guards, the prison cell, and even the coarse blankets that covered him. So Sri Aurobindo now looked upon the world after this spiritual experience in the jail. He looked upon the world not as unreal, but as a real manifestation of God himself. Inspired by these overwhelming spiritual experiences, Sri Aurobindo soon went on to reinterpret some of the key Vedantic scriptures and to develop a realistic Advaita philosophy, which he contrasted with what he called Shankara's illusionist Advaita philosophy. Like Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Aurobindo affirms the sole reality of an impersonal, personal, infinite divine reality, which has the capacity to manifest as the universe and all the individual souls inhabiting it. For Sri Aurobindo, then, the personal God, understood as Chit Shakti, or consciousness force, is an eternally real aspect of the divine Satchitananda. And this universe, as well as all the individual souls, are fully real manifestations of this Chit Shakti. In his full-scale interpretations of the Isha and Kena Upanishads, as well as the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Aurobindo argues that these Vedantic scriptures propound precisely such a realistic Advaita. One of the most unique aspects of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is his doctrine of the psychic entity, the reincarnating and evolving soul at the deepest core of our being, which is a portion of the divine Satchitananda itself. As a result of ignorance, we identify ourselves not with the divine psychic entity within, but with the superficial desire soul, the egoic self that is the seat of all worldly desires and attachments. Through various experiences, both pleasurable and unpleasurable, in the course of many, many embodiments, the psychic entity within us assimilates the essence of all of our experiences, eventually forming a full-fledged psychic being, which is able to use the body and mind as its instruments, thereby purifying and ultimately divinizing them. At an individual level, since all moral evil stems from the self-affirming vital ego, we can eliminate the evil qualities and tendencies within us by engaging in spiritual practice, which leads us gradually to break our identification with the egoistic desire soul and to identify instead with the true psychic entity within. For Sri Aurobindo, the ideal spiritual practice is an integral yoga that combines the disciplines of bhakti, devotion, jnana, knowledge, and karma works. Through the sincere practice of integral yoga and through the grace of the divine, we should eventually pass through 4 stages of spiritual realization. In the first stage of what he calls psychic awakening, we realize our identity with the psychic being within us, which becomes the dominant force in our personality, controlling and disciplining the body and mind. In the second stage, we attain the liberative realization that on a higher plane of consciousness, we are also the impersonal non-dual Atman, the transcendent witness, the Sakshi that remains unaffected by the world. In the third stage, we realize the impersonal personal divine being, or what he calls the Purushottama, one aspect of which is the eternal Atman, and a portion of which is the psychic entity within each individual soul. In the fourth and final stage, we rise to the level of supramental consciousness, the supermind, which transforms our life here on earth by divinizing us at every level of our being. At the collective level, all life on earth is a progressive self-manifestation of the divine. The world has very slowly evolved from apparently insentient matter to plant, animal, and human life, precisely because the divine consciousness force was always secretly involved in every form of earthly existence from the very beginning. According to Sri Aurobindo, just as nature has evolved from matter to mind, nature will in the future evolve from mind to supermind. Hence, vital egoism and the moral evil stemming from it is a necessary but transitional phase in the cosmic evolution, one that will eventually be superseded once we evolve from mind to supermind, an inconceivably blissful divine state of being in which evil and suffering have no place. Although the evolution from mind to supermind is inevitable, we can accelerate the process of this natural cosmic evolution through the individual and collective practice of integral yoga. That's the end of part 1, and I'll now move on to part 2. So part 2 discusses Sri Aurobindo's theodicy of spiritual evolution. This will be the focus of my paper today. Sri Aurobindo addresses the problem of evil at length in 2 works, The Riddle of This World, published in 1933, and The Life Divine, published a few years later in 1940. Since all of the key elements of the theodicy first presented in The Riddle of This World are developed with greater detail and rigor in The Life Divine, I will focus here on The Life Divine itself, in which he articulates and defends the various dimensions of his theodicy by means of a subtle argumentative dialectic, which I will attempt to reconstruct here. Sri Aurobindo motivates his own theodicy by arguing from a very high altitude that any theodicy that presupposes an ultimate ontological difference between the personal God and his creatures is doomed to fail. Most traditional theodicies, especially in Abrahamic traditions, presuppose the existence of, quote, an extra-cosmic personal God, not himself the universe, one who has created good and evil, pain and suffering for his creatures, but himself stands above and unaffected by them, end quote. Sri Aurobindo then goes on to launch a bold meta-critique of all such theodicies. And this is the second quotation on this slide. On no theory of an extra-cosmic moral God can evil and suffering be explained, the creation of evil and suffering, except by an unsatisfactory subterfuge, which avoids the question at issue instead of answering it, or a plain or implied Manichaeanism, which practically annuls the Godhead in attempting to justify its ways or excuse its works. This is, I think, a very pregnant passage, and it requires some unpacking, so I'm going to try to do that first. So this passage should remind us, so first of all, okay, so this passage first explains that since both evildoers in victim, one second. Yeah, okay, so Sri Aurobindo argues that any non-panentheistic attempt to explain why God permits his creatures to suffer is bound to fail because it inevitably falls into one of two errors. So what are these two errors? The first error, on the one hand, there are theodicies that provide a divine rationale for permitting suffering. Some Christian theodicists argue, for instance, that God has given us the invaluable gift of freedom, which necessitates the possibility of evil and suffering since we can misuse our freedom toward evil ends. The Christian philosopher John Hick, for instance, has argued that God has created this world as an environment for soul-making. This is his famous doctrine, soul-making, in which evil is inevitable. Through our encounter with both good and evil, we grow ethically and spiritually until we become perfect children of God and attain salvation. Sri Aurobindo seems to have this kind of soul-making theodicy in mind when he refers to the view that pain is a trial and an ordeal. From Sri Aurobindo's perspective, all such theodicies amount to nothing more than what he calls an unsatisfactory subterfuge. That's the first highlighted phrase in this passage. Why are they an unsatisfactory subterfuge? Because they cannot answer the ultimate question. If God is both omnipotent and perfectly loving, why did he devise a cosmic scheme that entails so much suffering for us? For instance, in the context of John Hick's soul-making theodicy, we can ask, why didn't God just create us as perfect children of God in the first place? In that case, there would have been no need and indeed no possibility of moral evil in this world. In the context of theodicies that appeal to the intrinsic value of human freedom, we can ask, couldn't God have created us as free creatures whose naturally good propensities nonetheless outweighed our evil propensities, so that we would have been far less inclined to commit evil deeds, if at all? It should be noted that Sri Aurobindo's meta-critique is so far-reaching that it applies not only to soul-making and freedom-based theodicies, but to any theodicy that presupposes a fundamental difference between God and his suffering creatures. So that's what I'm calling dualistic theodicies. It seems to me that theologians and philosophers have not yet paid sufficient attention to Sri Aurobindo's bold challenge to the traditional theodical enterprise. Indeed, the very fact that thinkers in the past 2 millennia, particularly in Abrahamic traditions, have proposed such a dizzying array of theodicies, none of which has become authoritative or has come anywhere close to finding universal acceptance, may reflect our lingering sense that all such theodicies are ultimately unconvincing subterfuges that evade the ultimate question. Even if we can somehow manage to explain why evil is necessary in this world, why couldn't the omnipotent God have created a different, better world in which there was much less evil or no evil at all? So that's with respect to the first kind of theodicy, which he calls an unsatisfactory subterfuge. Now look at the second highlighted phrase in the same passage, a plain or implied Manichaeanism. So on the other hand, any theodicy that attempts to get God off the hook by positing a superhuman evil agency, such as Satan or Ahriman, ends up being nothing more than, quote, a plain or implied Manichaeanism which practically annuls the Godhead in attempting to justify its ways or excuse its works. That is, any theodicy that grants as much or more power to the superhuman agency responsible for evil as it does to God is able at best to save God's omnibenevolence at the expense of his omnipotence. After all, God's omnipotence, by definition, entails that there is no power equal to or greater than his own. And if the evil superhuman agency is granted less power than God, then the problem of evil reappears in another form. If God is more powerful than the evil agency, why didn't God subdue or destroy this evil agency that is responsible for so much suffering in this world? In short, then, Sri Aurobindo argues that any theodicy that presupposes a difference between God and his creatures faces an aporia, so a fundamental contradiction. It turns out to be, in the final analysis, either a subterfuge that fails to justify God's ways, or a Manichaeanism that ends up curtailing God's omnipotence. After rejecting all theodicies that presuppose an extracosmic God, Sri Aurobindo goes on to reformulate the problem of evil in the context of his own panentheistic Vedantic framework. Quote, Satchitananda of the Vedanta is one existence without a second. All that is he. If then evil and suffering exist, it is he that bears the evil and suffering in the creature in whom he has embodied himself. The problem then changes entirely. The question is no longer how came God to create for his creatures a suffering and evil of which he is himself incapable and therefore immune, but how came the sole and infinite existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchitananda, to admit into itself that which is not bliss, that which seems to be its positive negation, end quote. If theodicies presupposing an extracosmic God strive to defend God against the charge of cruelty to others, Sri Aurobindo's panentheistic theodicy has to explain why God inflicts pain and suffering on himself. Why does the ever blissful Satchitananda choose to admit suffering into itself? One might argue that while Sri Aurobindo's God is not a sadist, delighting in the suffering of his creatures, he does seem to be a masochist, delighting in his own suffering. The problem of evil then morphs into the problem of divine masochism. Sri Aurobindo initially responds to this reformulated problem of evil by appealing to what contemporary analytic philosophers call skeptical theism. This is a quotation. If to us things appear undivine, if we hasten to condemn this or that phenomenon as inconsistent with the nature of divine being, it is because we are ignorant of the sense and purpose of the divine in the world in its entirety. Because we see only parts and fragments, we judge of each by itself as if it were the whole. Judge also the external phenomena without knowing their secret sense. But by doing so, we vitiate our valuation of things, put on it a stamp of an initial and fundamental error, end quotation. Sri Aurobindo emphasizes here the unfathomable gulf between our finite human minds and the omniscient mind of God. When we are confronted with a particularly egregious instance of evil, we are often tempted to assume that God could not possibly have had a good reason for permitting that evil. However, might it not be possible, in light of human cognitive limitations, that the omniscient and omnipotent God may have reasons for permitting a given instance of evil that lie beyond our ken, beyond our cognitive abilities? As a skeptical theist, Sri Aurobindo argues that just because we are unable to think of a good reason for God to permit an evil, we are not justified in inferring that God had no good reason for permitting that evil. So that's what contemporary philosophers call skeptical theism. I think that Sri Aurobindo's first line response to the problem of evil is a skeptical theist position. At the same time, Sri Aurobindo insists that the skeptical theist position, while true up to a certain point, is nonetheless incomplete. In a single dense sentence, he provides 3 arguments for why skeptical theism on its own is not adequate to diffuse the problem of evil. Quote, it takes insufficient account of the human consciousness and the human view from which we have to start. It does not give us the vision of the harmony it alleges, and so it cannot meet our demand or convince, but only contradicts by a cold intellectual conception our acute human sense of the reality of evil and imperfection. It gives, too, no lead to the psychic element in our nature, the soul's aspiration towards light and truth and towards a spiritual conquest, a victory over imperfection and evil, end quote. So what are these three reasons he gives for the incompleteness of skeptical theism? First, the skeptical theist position fails to take sufficiently into account the fact that the problem of evil is a problem that arises from our limited human standpoint. For instance, even if we concede the skeptical theistic argument that God may have reasons for acting that lie beyond our ken, the problem of evil reemerges in another form, since we can still ask why a loving God would hide from us his reasons for acting. Why would a perfectly loving God leave us in the dark on these matters? That's the first argument. Second, skeptical theism, quote, does not give us the vision of the harmony it alleges. So that's also taken from the same passage. What does he mean by that? In other words, Sri Aurobindo argues that skeptical theism is incomplete without theodicy. A fully adequate response to the problem of evil must not only appeal to the skeptical theist argument that God may have reasons for permitting evil that we cannot fathom, but also provide a plausible positive explanation of why God permits evil. So skeptical theism has to be supplemented by theodicy. Third, and perhaps most interestingly, Sri Aurobindo argues that skeptical theism by itself gives no lead to our soul, the psychic entity within us that strives to overcome evil and to help divinize this world. Put another way, the skeptical theist position dismisses the problem of evil too swiftly, thereby failing to recognize that there is in fact a deep spiritual truth at the core of the problem of evil itself, namely our soul's divine dissatisfaction with our present imperfect state of being and its divine aspiration to grow into a divine state of being in which imperfection and evil no longer have a place. In light of Sri Aurobindo's criticisms of skeptical theism as a self-sufficient response to the problem of evil, we might ask, what precise role does skeptical theism play in his overall response to the problem of evil? Although answering this question requires speculating somewhat beyond what Sri Aurobindo explicitly states in The Life Divine, I will provide an answer that I see as a plausible extension or development of Sri Aurobindo's complex stance towards skeptical theism. The key, I think, is to recognize that Sri Aurobindo acknowledges not one single problem of evil, but several different forms of the problem of evil. For instance, many people have formulated the problem of evil as an argument from evil against God's existence. Let us call this POE subscript S, with the S standing for skeptics. So it's the problem of evil for skeptics who think that the problem of evil should lead us to question or deny God's existence. Sri Aurobindo is clearly aware of POES since he cites the Buddha as an example of someone who denied the existence of a personal God by arguing that an all-loving God would never have devised a law of karma that entails so much suffering for his creatures. One standard form of POES, so the problem of evil for skeptics, which contemporary philosophers call the evidential argument from evil, usually runs as follows. Premise 1, there exist instances of horrendous moral evil. Premise 2, an omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good being would prevent the occurrence of any horrendous moral evil. Conclusion 3, therefore, there does not exist an omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good being. So while premise 1 seems uncontroversially true, premise 2 can be questioned. A number of recent philosophers, including William Alston and Daniel Howard Snyder, have attempted to refute premise 2 by defending the skeptical theist view that in light of human cognitive limitations, we are never in a position to know or even to have good reasons to believe that an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving God would prevent all instances of horrendous evil. Skeptical theists argue that premise 2 is based on the unjustified inference from, I cannot think of a good reason for God to have permitted horrendous evil E, to, there is no good reason for God to have permitted E. I believe Sri Aurobindo would agree with contemporary philosophers like Alston that skeptical theism is sufficient on its own to refute arguments from evil against God's existence. That is, I think Sri Aurobindo would claim that skeptical theism is enough to refute POES, right? These kinds of arguments from evil against God's existence. However, Sri Aurobindo was well aware that a different form of the problem of evil arises for religious believers as opposed to skeptics. Let us call this POEB, with the B standing for religious believers who do not so much question God's existence as attempt to strengthen and deepen their religious faith by gaining a better understanding of why God permits the evils they see in the world. Accordingly, he formulates the ethical problem of evil in terms of POEB. So this is a quotation. For if the world be an expression of Satchidananda, not only of existence that is conscious force, for that can easily be admitted, but of existence that is also infinite self-delight, how are we to account for the universal presence of grief, of suffering, of pain? Notice that he poses the ethical problem of evil from within his integral Vedantic framework. Even those who accept that the world is a manifestation of Satchidananda usually will, and indeed should, raise the question of why there is so much suffering in this supposedly divine world. For Sri Aurobindo, while skeptical theism is sufficient on its own to resolve POES, the problem of evil for skeptics, which I discussed in the previous slide, a fully adequate response to POEB, the problem of evil for religious believers, must combine skeptical theism with theodicy. It is in this sense, I think, that he claims that skeptical theism is incomplete without a theodical vision of the harmony it alleges. As we will see, Sri Aurobindo combines skeptical theism with what I call a saint-making theodicy, grounded ultimately in a panentheistic metaphysics. Sri Aurobindo motivates his theodicy by asking, quote, why should Brahman, perfect, absolute, infinite, needing nothing, desiring nothing, at all throw out force of consciousness to create in itself these worlds of forms, end quote. Sri Aurobindo answers this question by appealing to the traditional Vedantic doctrine of Leela. Since God is absolutely free and desireless, we cannot impute any ordinary motives to God, since any such motive would imply a lack or a need in God, thereby contradicting God's perfection and freedom. Therefore, Satchidananda can only manifest as this universe in a spirit of sportive play, of Leela. As Sri Aurobindo puts it, the world is the Leela of God, who is creating and recreating himself in himself for the sheer bliss of that self-creation, of that self-representation. Himself the play, himself the player, himself the playground, end quote. Notice that Sri Aurobindo explains God's cosmic Leela from a panentheistic standpoint, according to which everything and everyone involved in a Leela, indeed the Leela itself, is God alone. So just for the students in the audience who might not know what panentheism is, so there are two terms, pantheism and panentheism. Pantheism is the view that this world is God, but that God is nothing over and above the world. Panentheism means the world is God and God is also beyond the world. So God is the world and God is also beyond the world. So I'm claiming that Sri Aurobindo endorses a panentheistic metaphysics. Further, Sri Aurobindo argues that this world Leela is teleologically oriented. That is, that it's oriented toward a goal. As he puts it, there is a reason in the all-wisdom that makes the play, this Leela, significant and intelligible. According to Sri Aurobindo, the divine Satchidananda has playfully created this world as an arena for the gradual evolutionary manifestation of the divine. Satchidananda, which is first involved in apparently insentient matter, manifests in progressively higher forms from plant life to animal life. The current human stage of evolution represents a marked advance from previous stages, since human beings have developed their mental, moral, aesthetic, and spiritual capacities to a much greater extent than lower animals have. Nonetheless, the mental consciousness of man, which is part knowledge, part ignorance, is not the pinnacle of cosmic evolution, but only a transitional phase that will eventually culminate in the evolutionary telos of supermind. He elaborates the far-reaching theological implications of this evolutionary doctrine in the following passage. It's a long passage, but I think it's worth reading in full. Imperfection becomes then a necessary term of the manifestation. For since all the divine nature is concealed but present in the inconscient, it must be gradually delivered out of it. This graduation necessitates a partial unfolding, and this partial character or incompleteness of the unfolding necessitates imperfection. An evolutionary manifestation demands a mid-stage with gradations above and under it. Precisely such a stage as the mental consciousness of man, part knowledge, part ignorance, a middle power of being still leaning on the inconscient, but slowly rising towards the all-conscious divine nature. A partial unfolding implying imperfection and ignorance may take as its inevitable companion, perhaps its basis for certain movements, an apparent perversion of the original truth of being. For the ignorance or imperfection to endure, there must be a seeming contrary of all that characterizes the divine nature. It's unity, it's all consciousness, it's all power, it's all harmony, it's all good, it's all delight. There must appear limitation, discord, unconsciousness, disharmony, incapacity, insensibility, and suffering, evil, end quote. Through an elaborate chain of reasoning, Sri Aurobindo infers the necessity of evil from the quote-unquote graduation of the cosmic evolution. In the course of his subtle theological argument, he exploits the semantic bivalence of the crucial term graduation. For Sri Aurobindo, the cosmic evolution is graduated both in the sense that it is a stadial one, right? S-T-A-D-I-A-L, in the sense of stages. It is a stadial one, and in the sense that it is a gradual one. So these are the two senses of graduation, stadial and gradual. In the first step of his argument, he claims that the graduation of the cosmic evolution necessitates a partial unfolding. Here, I think he means primarily that the evolutionary process is a stadial one, which requires that the divine Satchidananda is only partially manifested in all of the intermediate stages of evolution. This partial character of the divine unfolding at the intermediate stages of evolution, in turn, necessitates imperfection, since absolute perfection is only achieved at the endpoint of the evolutionary process. At our current mental stage of evolution, imperfection is inevitable, since human consciousness is a mixture of knowledge and ignorance. But why does imperfection entail evil and suffering? Sri Aurobindo answers this key theological question by emphasizing the fact that God has freely chosen to make this evolutionary process a slow and gradual one. A slow evolution from ignorance to divine knowledge requires that imperfection endure for some time in the intermediate evolutionary stages. And it is precisely the apparently undivine qualities, such as limitation, suffering, and evil, which serve as a kind of strong, albeit ultimately transient, counter-pressure to the immanent divine, which would otherwise unfold much too rapidly in the evolutionary process. At this point, Sri Aurobindo anticipates a serious objection to his theodicy. Why did the free and omnipotent Satchidananda choose to devise such a slow evolutionary scheme in the first place, if he knew that it would entail so much evil and suffering? Sri Aurobindo responds to this objection by appealing to what could be described as a spiritual Hegelianism. That's my term. The divine Satchidananda freely chooses to plunge into inconscience and to manifest itself very slowly in the course of evolution for the sake of the unique delight of achieving, quote, a new affirmation of Satchidananda in its apparent opposite. So I see this, actually you'll find similar themes in, for instance, Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. So, but I call it a spiritual Hegelianism because he's arguing for this position from a spiritual standpoint. From Sri Aurobindo's perspective, only the divine Satchidananda is so daring, so powerful, so self-assured that it would freely choose among its infinite possibilities for manifestation the one that involves such a deep and perilous plunge into apparent inconscience with all its attendant imperfection and suffering. However, one could still object that Sri Aurobindo's theodicy is so high altitude, so cosmic, that while it might explain why Satchidananda chooses to permit so much evil in his cosmic Leela, it has not yet been able to account for suffering individuals. Put another way, even if nothing exists but God, most of us have not yet attained this panentheistic spiritual realization. So we still feel that we are individuals subject to pain and suffering of all kinds. As Sri Aurobindo himself acknowledges, even a theodicy based on a panentheistic metaphysics must account for the apparent suffering of the individual. Quote, we cannot and ought not to dismiss as entirely and radically false and unreal the values that are given to it, that is the universe, by our own limited human consciousness. Sri Aurobindo begins to explain how the individual utility of evil is related to its cosmic utility in the following passage. So this is how he responds to that objection in the previous slide. Quote, "For without experience of pain, we would not get all the infinite value of the divine delight of which pain is in travail. All ignorance is a penumbra which environs an orb of knowledge. Every error is significant of the possibility and the effort of a discovery of truth. Every weakness and failure is a first sounding of gulfs of power and potentiality. All division is intended to enrich by an experience of various sweetness of unification, the joy of realized unity. All this imperfection is to us evil, but all evil is in travail of the eternal good. For all is an imperfection, which is the first condition in the law of life, evolving out of inconscience of a greater perfection in the manifesting of the hidden divinity. According to Sri Aurobindo, we grow morally and spiritually through our experiences of both good and evil, strength and weakness, truth and error." In order to explain how apparently adverse experiences can help us evolve morally and spiritually, Sri Aurobindo appeals to his key doctrine of the psychic entity. For Sri Aurobindo, so the psychic entity, remember, is the soul, basically, the eternal soul within us. For Sri Aurobindo, the gradualness of the evolutionary process at the cosmic level is mirrored at the individual level in the gradual evolution of individual souls through the course of many embodiments. Accordingly, at various points in Life Divine, he makes clear that his evolutionary theodicy presupposes the traditional Hindu doctrines of karma and rebirth. As he puts it, the cosmic evolution runs in parallel with, quote, "an invisible process of soul evolution, with rebirth into ascending grades of form and consciousness as its machinery." End quote. If there were no rebirth, the individual would simply disappear at death, and only the species to which that individual belonged would continue to live on until it evolved into a higher species. However, beneath the superficial and ephemeral body-mind complex lies the reincarnating soul, the eternal psychic entity within us, which evolves from life to life and assumes bodies in higher and higher species. For Sri Aurobindo then, quote, "each grade of cosmic manifestation, each type of form that can house the indwelling spirit, is turned by rebirth into a means for the individual soul, the psychic entity, to manifest more and more of its concealed consciousness," end quote. For instance, as the psychic entity evolves, it may assume the body of a dog in one life, an ape in another, and then many different human bodies until it is finally able to manifest the divine fully. Sri Aurobindo explains the theodical significance of his doctrine of the evolving soul as follows. The psychic, quote, "the psychic being in us takes its account even of its most perverse or contrary, as well as its more benign experiences, and grows by the rejection of them or acceptance. It extracts a divine meaning and use from our most poignant sufferings, difficulties, misfortunes," end quote. In the early stages of its development, the psychic entity, even though it only seeks that which is true, good, and divine, is not sufficiently powerful and evolved to control and discipline the body, life, and mind of the individual. As a result, less spiritually, less psychically evolved individuals tend to be unaware of or unreceptive to the higher promptings of the psychic entity within them, obeying instead the superficial ego, which usually prompts them to engage in wrong thought and action, inevitably leading to suffering and evil. However, in the course of each embodiment, the psychic entity in each of us evolves and grows stronger by discerning the divine sense and purpose of all our experiences of both happiness and suffering. The psychic entity, as a spark of the divine, aids in the divine purpose of turning to, quote, "our spiritual profit, even our experiences of utmost suffering and our worst acts of evil and cruelty." Significantly, Sri Aurobindo also takes pains to connect his account of the evolving psychic entity to the doctrines of karma and rebirth. For Sri Aurobindo, rebirth is the machinery of an evolutionary process. In order to evolve spiritually, the psychic entity assumes new bodies until it is finally able to express fully the divine within. Moreover, while Sri Aurobindo claims that karma governs the circumstances of our present and future births, he nuances and refines the traditional doctrine of karma from his evolutionary standpoint. So he reinterprets the traditional Indian doctrine of karma in a non-retributive manner. That's my claim. He emphatically rejects the common but simplistic idea of karma as a primarily retributive principle, as a principle of retribution, a principle of what he calls rewards and punishments. According to Sri Aurobindo, karma should be understood most fundamentally as a principle of spiritual evolution, not of retribution, not of punishment. Quote, nor can good fortune and evil fortune, pleasure and pain, happiness and misery and suffering be taken as if they existed merely as incentives and deterrents to the natural being in its choice of good and evil. It is for experience, for growth of the individual being, that the soul enters into rebirth. Joy and grief, pain and suffering, fortune and misfortune are parts of that experience, means of that growth. Even the soul may of itself accept or choose poverty, misfortune, and suffering as helpful to its growth, stimulants of a rapid development, and reject riches and prosperity and success as dangerous and conducive to a relaxation of its spiritual effort. All the secret of the circumstances of rebirth centers around the one capital need of the soul, the need of growth, the need of experience. That governs the line of its evolution, and all the rest is accessory. Cosmic existence is not a vast administrative system of universal justice with a cosmic law of recompense and retribution as its machinery, or a divine legislator and judge at its center, end quote. According to the popular view of karma, good deeds are rewarded with fortunate or pleasurable circumstances in a future birth, while evil deeds are punished with unfortunate or unpleasant circumstances. While Sri Aurobindo does not reject outright this popular conception of karma, he argues that it is an overly mechanical and simplistic understanding of the complex workings of karma. Since the primary function of karma is to foster the soul's spiritual evolution, the soul may even in certain cases choose to experience poverty and suffering in a future birth as a means of spiritual growth. Crucially, Sri Aurobindo also accepts the doctrine of universal salvation. For Sri Aurobindo, every soul will continue to evolve and assume new bodies on earth until it finally attains the goal of realizing its oneness with the divine Satchitananda. The very fact that the soul within each of us is a portion of the divine necessitates that every soul will eventually realize and manifest fully its true divine nature. As Sri Aurobindo puts it, the individual must wake into the delight of the eternal superconscious self-possession and there become one with the indivisible Satchitananda. It is important not to miss the force of the word must here. So that's in the quotation. Note that in the last bullet point. The evolutionary process of each soul must culminate in its salvific realization of oneness with the divine. That is, every single person in this world will eventually attain the highest goal. Some contemporary Western philosophers and theologians are beginning to recognize the theodical necessity of universal salvation. The Christian philosopher John Hick, for instance, argues that the doctrine of eternal damnation for even a single soul is fatal to theodicy. On the one hand, if God wishes to save everyone, but is unable to, then he is not omnipotent. On the other hand, if God is able to save everyone, but unwilling to, then he is not perfectly good. Therefore, Hick concludes that, quote, the needs of Christian theodicy compel us to repudiate the idea of eternal punishment, end quote. So in Orthodox Christianity, there's this idea of an eternal hell. Hick claims that any assumption of an eternal hell destroys the project of theodicy. I believe Sri Aurobindo would have agreed with Hick that any theodicy that does not accept the doctrine of universal salvation is doomed to fail. Arguably, the fact that Sri Aurobindo's theodicy of spiritual evolution explicitly embraces universal salvation constitutes a distinct advantage over the majority of traditional Abrahamic theodicies, which presuppose that at least some souls will not be saved. At this point, we might still protest on behalf of suffering individuals everywhere that even if we accept Sri Aurobindo's claims that our suffering is ultimately for our own spiritual benefit and that all of us will eventually attain the blissful state of salvation, is there not still an element of coercion or even cruelty in the fact that God apparently forces us to participate in his cosmic play of spiritual evolution? After all, a child who chooses to go on a, let's say, a roller coaster ride, okay? Do people know what a roller coaster is? It's a kind of, it's a ride where you go up and down very quickly, right? Children go on these rides. So a child who chooses to go on a roller coaster ride may very well enjoy the ride, but would it not be cruel for a friend or parent to force a child to go on this roller coaster ride against the child's will? The same roller coaster ride, which is a joy and thrill for someone who chooses to go on it, may be a horrifying, vomit-inducing experience for someone else who is forced to go on it against her will. Similarly, would not God's perfect goodness be vitiated if he forced souls to go on his cosmic, suffering-filled roller coaster ride of spiritual evolution, stretched out over many lives, even against their will? Sri Aurobindo forthrightly answers this question in the affirmative. He says yes, but claims that every individual soul involved in the slow evolutionary journey, the spiritual adventure on this earth, actually consents to participating in it. So this is a quotation. A manifestation of this kind, self-creation or lila, would not seem justifiable if it were imposed on the unwilling creature, but it will be evident that the assent of the embodied spirit must be there already, for Prakriti cannot act without the assent of the Purusha. There must have been not only the will of the divine Purusha, that is God, to make the cosmic creation possible, but the assent, the agreement of the individual Purusha to make the individual manifestation possible. End quote. According to Sri Aurobindo, all of us are participating in what he calls this great adventure of the soul, end quote, because we have chosen to be adventurers. It is crucial to recognize, however, that the we here, who is the we that consents? The we here is not the superficial ego, but the deeper psychic entity within us, the soul, that assents to participating in this divine lila of spiritual evolution. At several points in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo observes that apart from this evolutionary terrestrial world in which we currently find ourselves, there exist unchanging, non-evolving typal worlds, that's his phrase, in which souls also reside. So this is a quotation. There is a possibility of self-expression by an always unveiled luminous development of the being, a possibility also of various expression in perfect types, fixed and complete in their own nature. That is the principle of becoming in the higher worlds, higher lokas. They are typal and not evolutionary in their life principle. They exist each in its own perfection, but within the limits of a stationary world formula, end quotation. I believe Sri Aurobindo's distinction between this evolving terrestrial world, this earth, and higher non-evolving typal worlds is a crucial one for understanding the theodical role of the individual soul's assent to participating in God's cosmic lila of spiritual evolution. It is plausible to assume that at least some of the souls residing in these higher typal worlds are precisely those who have not consented to participating in this evolutionary adventure here on earth. From Sri Aurobindo's standpoint, then, every single one of us here on earth is here because our souls have chosen to participate in this suffering-filled terrestrial lila. Sri Aurobindo then raises one final question. Wouldn't it have been more sensible for our souls to have chosen to remain in blissful, non-evolving, higher worlds? So we might ask, why did my soul choose to take part in this adventure, right? That's the final objection. Is it not foolhardy or perverse, or at the very least counterintuitive, for souls to prefer this arduous, long drawn out evolutionary play here on earth to the higher type of worlds in which ignorance and suffering are entirely absent? In response to this question, Sri Aurobindo claims that individual souls, like the divine Satchitananda itself, choose to participate in this evolutionary adventure for the sake of what he calls the play of self-concealing and self-finding, which is one of the most strenuous joys that conscious being can give to itself, a play of extreme attractiveness, end quote. To make this rather unusual delight more understandable to us, he points out that it is not entirely different from the joy ordinary people often derive from achieving victory and success in the face of various obstacles and difficulties. As he puts it, quote, "There is no greater pleasure for man himself than a victory, which is in its very principle a conquest over difficulties, a victory in knowledge, a victory in power, a victory in creation over the impossibilities of creation. a delight in the conquest over an English toil in a hard ordeal of suffering, end quotation. For instance, those who choose to spend months or years training for and running in a marathon obviously find a joy in all the arduous struggle and effort, particularly when the effort pays off in the end, say when they beat their own personal best time. Similarly, from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, the psychic entity finds a distinct joy in participating in this unique terrestrial adventure in which it forgets its divine nature, slowly evolves and develops through its experience of all the various hardships and evils that stem from spiritual ignorance, and finally manifests its true divine nature. Sri Aurobindo's response to the problem of evil then has three basic dimensions. So this is my overall summary of my reconstruction. So the three dimensions are: 1, skeptical theism; 2, a panentheistic metaphysics; and 3, a theodicy of spiritual evolution. In order to refute arguments from evil against God's existence, so remember I call those POES, the problem of evil for skeptics. Sri Aurobindo defends the skeptical theist view that in light of human cognitive limitations, our inability to understand why an omnipotent and all-loving God would permit certain particularly horrendous evils gives us no good reason to believe that God had no good reason for permitting these evils. However, Sri Aurobindo also insists that skeptical theism on its own is not an adequate response to POEB, so the problem of evil for religious believers, the other form of the problem of evil that arises for those who believe in God, but who struggle to reconcile their faith with the existence of all the evil in the world. In response to POEB, Sri Aurobindo combines skeptical theism with a theodicy of spiritual evolution, which is itself grounded in a panentheistic metaphysics. He motivates his own panentheistic theodicy by arguing that any theodicy that presupposes an ultimate ontological difference between God and his creatures is bound to fail. From Sri Aurobindo's panentheistic standpoint of realistic Advaita, the problem of evil takes a rather different form. Why does the perfect and omnipotent God choose to inflict suffering, or at least apparent suffering, on himself by manifesting in the form of this universe and the ignorant individual souls inhabiting it? Sri Aurobindo's answer is that the divine Satchitananda takes special delight in the cosmic play of self-concealing and self-finding, a play in which the divine conceals himself in apparently insentient matter, progressively manifests in the course of a slow evolution through higher and higher species, and eventually unfolds itself completely once mind evolves into supermind. However, Sri Aurobindo is quick to point out that this panentheistic worldview is not one that denies or overlooks all difference in individuality. So a fully adequate theodicy must take into account not only the divine standpoint, but also the standpoint of the ignorant individual souls for whom suffering and evil remain all too real and pressing. Crucially, the psychic entity within each of us consents to participating in the divine's cosmic play of spiritual evolution for the sake of the heightened joy of achieving spiritual victory through adversity and struggle. In the course of countless embodiments, the psychic entity slowly evolves and grows stronger as it encounters both good and evil, until it finally forms a psychic being that is able to use the body, life, and mind as instruments of the divine. Moreover, every soul without exception is destined to attain the salvific realization that it is one with the divine Satchitananda. For Sri Aurobindo then, evil and suffering belong to a necessary but transitional stage in each soul's self-chosen journey of spiritual evolution from ignorance to divine knowledge. So that wraps up my presentation. I just wanted to mention that what I just read out to you today is a shorter version of a paper, of an article that's going to be published as part of a special issue of a journal called International Journal of Hindu Studies, published by Springer. So the special issue, the theme of the special issue is Vedantic theodicies. And there are 3 contributors. So Michael Williams, he's an excellent scholar based in the UK. He's written on Vyasatita's theodicy. Vyasatita was a follower of Madhva, Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta. Ankur Barua has written an article on comparative Hindu-Christian theodicy. And my article is the longer version of the paper that I presented to you today. So stay tuned. That should be published in a few months. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Let me very quickly summarize. very synoptically what Swamiji wanted to convey through his paper. It's exhaustive, and basically it analyzes the problem of evil in philosophy of religion, or as part of a issue in theodicy. The study of theological theodicy. Now, you know that the problem of evil is normally adduced as adduced to contest the twin claims in religion, that God is both omnipotent and benevolent. The problem stands like this, and he tries to see how Sri Aurobindo tries to justify the presence of so-called evil as a part of the divine dynamics in promoting or facilitating evolution. That is the conclusion of the thesis. Now, problem of evil stands like this. Now, if God is benevolent, God is loving, he would like that there is no evil. Because if God loves us most, he would not like his children to be subject to evil. If God is all loving, then he would not wish that there is evil. And if since God is omnipotent, he can prevent evil. I'm putting it in a common man's language, without any sophistication of philosophy. If God is loving, then he would not like us to suffer, to put it, dilute further. And since he's all powerful, he can translate his ways into reality. So there should be no evil if God is both omnipotent and benevolent. That is the position. So the presence of evil contests the twin qualities of God, that God is all powerful and all loving. How can it be? If he's all loving, why he would wish that there is no evil? We don't suffer. We do suffer. Maybe God is willing that there is no suffering, but he's incapable. He's not omnipotent. So omnipotence and benevolence cannot go hand in hand with the existence of evil. That is the position. Now, first of all, in the first part of the second lecture, he says that this arises out of the duality between creator and the creation. Dualistic. That God has created the world, but he is different from the creatures who are made to suffer. When trying to address the skeptical arguments against in normal theology, the theological framework, he says, going to the last part of the lecture, he says that evil is necessary for good. There are 4 solutions in theology. In our problem of evil, there are 4 solutions. First is, the world is better with evil than with all good. If good is all good, then good will cease to be significant. So evil gives polarities, give meaning to each other. Polarities are essential to phenomenal existence. In that sense, second is aesthetic solution. It doesn't name it, but it is in the tradition, it is known as aesthetic solution. Suppose you have a painting. It is all white. The painting will not do good unless there are black spots. So when you get a black spot, you say, how can you put black in the painting? But when the painting is complete, you know that the blackness also contributes. So the world is aesthetically more appealing. I think you understand the logic. This is called aesthetic solution. First of all, you are taking canvas and put only black spots. What are you doing? You are painting. Yes, wait. When you complete the painting, you know that the black also contributes to the beauty of the painting. So in that sense, evil is also cosmically designed so that the world looks so beautiful. This is number 2. Number 3 is, evil is necessary for good, for soul making. Suffering is necessary for soul making. This is Sri Aurobindo's stand. And Swamiji was trying to articulate it in his thesis of, you can say, what is that called? Stadial or a gradual thesis. That we are proceeding through stages. And in this cosmic dynamics, the evil enables us to make us more and more perfect. So evil has also its purifying role in the cosmic act of gamut of evolution. Since this is Aurobindo uses a term called lila, and scholars make a distinction between lila and krida. Krida is the human play, the rules of which is known to human beings. But lila is that the dynamics of which is known only to the cosmic. Human mind cannot figure out the dynamics of the cosmic. So, why he created the world? Why he created the world? The only thing is lila. Why there is lila? Why there is no lila at all? Why there is a creation rather than no creation? It has no answer. Because it far exceeds the comprehension. It is called lila. That is why the sport of the cosmic sport lila, it is known only to himself. Now, when it plunges into ignorance, the so-called evil is nothing but a partial good withheld. And unless it is there, the evolution cannot take place. So, in this evolution, where there is a gradualism, where we graduate to higher and higher stages, matter into life into mind into supermind, and supermind into unmanifested. Now, these stages, the so-called evil is nothing but part of the display of ignorance, imperfection. So, imperfection is built into the nature of perfection. It is imperfection which is necessary to make the perfection if you look from cosmic perspective. From a finite perspective, the evil negates the existence of God. But from the cosmic perspective, there are two perspectives. From global perspective, holistic perspective, evil, imperfection, evil, these are integral part of growth. Look at a small sprout, some small seed. Unless it struggles, unless there is an antithesis, it cannot come out of the cover of the seed, cannot come out of the soil. So we find that conflicts, imperfections, struggle against that, to overcome that, there consists in our Purushartha or our growth. So Aurobindo's stand is that the so-called evil is not really evil. It is this is another fourth solution. Evil is good in disguise. Evil, it is good misunderstood. In traditional evil, you will read the literature. There is nothing like evil. It is good misunderstood. That which appears as evil from a finite perspective, from a holistic perspective, when you look in retrospect, it was all good and good. Your suffering has made you what you are. So that is why, Sri Aurobindo tries to justify the metaphysics of Sri Aurobindo, the metaphysics of evolution, tries to give an appropriate place to evil, so-called evil or imperfection. That is nothing but necessary for human growth and evolution. That is the stand, and he has done it very elaborately. Now it's open to discussion. Somebody would love to answer. Okay.
Thank you for summarizing it. Anirbanji, please. Nice to see you after all this time.
Hi, yeah. Okay, so it was a great paper.
Thank you.
So as I was kind of trying to formulate how to kind of react, and you kept kind of reacting back in a sense.
With the objection.
So, like I was initially thinking that, so how, what is evil? Like, should we understand evil always originating in human action? Because that's the wrong way to look at it, because it's like the human situation which has suffering and evil out there. And evil could be, natural in other ways. So human as a source, as a place where the evil acts in different ways, from other humans or from nature, other ways. But the suffering is to human and other life forms. Then I was thinking, how do we understand Aurobindo's idea of God? So does he understand, because he talks about Satchidananda, he talks about Brahman, and are we trying to infuse a sense of God that we understand in the West into his philosophy? So how does he understand God? Does he talk about God? Does he talk about Ishwar, or what is his term for God? Then you started talking about panentheism. And in talking about panentheism, I was thinking how to understand the individual identity, individual agency, and the individual suffering even. If it's just the Leela of Satchidananda or whatever loose sense of God you are talking about, and how to understand the individual identity at all, the ontology of the individual. Because if it's all is God, God is part of the world and it extends out of there. So this is another issue that was coming up. And then the play of history like the play of history in which this is a situation and this is going to move towards another situation, which you talk about a spiritual Hegelianism. And this also seems like a science fiction, which is like a philosophical fiction of Aurobindo. I used to teach Aurobindo when I just joined here and I was asked to teach. And I could understand it as a fiction, but I couldn't think of it as as having real argument for suggesting that this stage should be followed by this stage and so on and so forth. It's nice fiction, but it's not an interesting philosophical position. Then you talk about Karmavad, and you say that Aurobindo has a different position about Karmavad and saying it's not retributive, it's not punishment oriented, it's not about, but I think Karmavad has a very important function, not about regulating our agency in fear of punishment and reward, but about explaining our present situation. So they, I think, understand Karmavad as regulating our present situation. How are we born? In what kind of circumstance? Why are we born at all? In terms of our past history. So past kind of designs our present. And if you let go of that kind of punishment orientation or whatever, that retributive or action-oriented kind of thing, then it's difficult to present situation of individuals and the variety of their situations. Why is someone in so much suffering? Why is someone born with a disability? And why is someone born with in a better situation, so to say? So this Karmavad kind of ultimately does it to kind of retribution. Then you were talking about so then in the end, the talk that you bring in about Aurobindo is saying that actually it's not that we are being forced into this lila, that actually we have chosen. And this seems like this choice is being thrust upon us, and we can't remember, but it says, okay, but you have done it somewhere, So this thrust, this like puts the onus on us, onus on the individual. That it's like the Christian about original sin. It's like somehow you are the sinner and you have to live out. He's not saying you are the sinner, but he's saying you have made the choice and you have chosen to live this life of suffering and so on and so forth, and for your benefit at some point of time. And this is going to help you at some point of time. So if someone says, okay, I've had enough of this game and I want to just jump out, is there an option? What would Aurobindo think about a suicide? So it's like you have chosen the game, you don't know when you chose, and you have to keep playing because you have to go on. So all these are, I think, the five odd things that I kind of.
Very nice, thank you so much. It's a very thoughtful kind of engagement with my paper. So let me try to address them one by one briefly, and then I can take other questions from others. So first of all, regarding the question of God, what is the nature of God? This is a huge issue, and I've written extensively on this in other papers, but just to save time, I didn't go into it. But the main idea is, I think that he's profoundly influenced by Sri Ramakrishna. He was very strongly influenced by the teachings and life of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Kathamrita, the Bangla Kathamrita. It's a recording of his teachings. But there, Sri Ramakrishna again and again says, Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun, Brahma Oshukti Abhed. So the Nirguna, impersonal, non-dual Brahman is inseparable from the personal dynamic Shakti, otherwise known as Ishvara, right? So, and then Sri Ramakrishna would say sometimes, he says, যখন তিনি নিষ্ক্রিয় তখন আমি ব্রহ্ম বলে কই, যখন তিনি সৃষ্টি স্থিতি প্রলয় করেন তখন আমি কালী বলে কই, শক্তি বলে কই. So it's a dual aspect theory of God with both impersonal and personal aspects, but they're both just different aspects of one and the same divine reality. That's his basic ontology of Satchitananda. That was the first point. Your second point was about within Sri Aurobindo's panentheistic metaphysical framework what is the ontology of individual identity? That itself is a very, very important question, and it's one, again, that I actually discussed this in a separate paper. There's another special issue that's edited by Jonathan Ganeri. Many of you probably have heard of Jonathan Ganeri, and Ite Shani. It's an entire special issue of The Monist. It's published by Oxford on Indian cosmopsychism theories. So cosmopsychism is a view in philosophy of mind that's become quite popular, which means that there is only one universal consciousness from which all individual consciousnesses derive. So my contribution for that special issue is on Sri Aurobindo's cosmopsychist theory, and there I discuss this issue at length, and Basically, he spends many chapters in the Life Divine devoted to answering your question, which is how do we get individual identities from the one single divine consciousness? And his answer is very complicated, as usual, characteristically for Sri Aurobindo. But the basic idea is that he introduces these principles of what he calls self-limitation. And he says that the divine Satchidananda, as the omnipotent divine being, has the capacity to limit itself and chooses to limit itself in a spirit of sportive play. So again, the Leela concept comes in. So the divine, by limiting itself, and then after the self-limitation, where does ignorance come in? He says that there's a further process which he calls exclusive concentration. And there are several chapters of the Life Divine devoted to what he means by exclusive concentration. He gives an interesting analogy where he says that, if we're studying a subject very, very deeply, whether it's philosophy or computer science or something, we sometimes immerse ourselves so deeply in that we lose consciousness of our surroundings. We forget to eat our breakfast, that kind of a thing. So in the same way, he says, just as a kind of human analogy, he says the divine has the capacity for exclusive concentration on one particular aspect of its divine consciousness to the expense of everything else. So he tries to explain the origin of ignorance and evil and the ontology of individual identities through these twin principles of self-limitation and exclusive concentration. So that's regarding your second question. The third question, which is very interesting, is this kind of spiritual adventure, this cosmic kind of teleology that Sri Aurobindo sketches in Life Divine. It sounds too good to be true in a way, and it sounds almost fictional, like something that comes out of sci-fi, which is interesting. So here, there's an aspect of my paper that I didn't discuss today, but which I discussed in the full version of the paper, which is something that Stephen Phillips, who was one of the first to write in a philosophically serious manner about Sri Aurobindo, which he emphasized. He emphasized what he called Sri Aurobindo's mystic empiricism. Okay, and that's very, very popular now among philosophers of religion. The idea is that if mystical experiences have epistemic value, if they can be considered to deliver a form of knowledge, then mystical experiences themselves can count as a source of justification for truth claims. So Sri Aurobindo a million times insists that all the stuff I'm telling you now is neither the stuff of fiction, nor is it merely a kind of intellectual hypothesis. It stems from my own direct spiritual experiences. Now, the first question you're going to ask then is, well, how do we know you really had those experiences? You can just be making things up. I can claim to have all sorts of experiences, and that's true. But then there's a whole elaborate kind of debate back and forth, which I'm not going to go into. We don't have the time. But I discussed that in other places, like my book, Infinite Paths to Infinite Realities, the book of Sri Ramakrishna. The whole chapter 6 of that book is devoted to this question of the epistemic value of mystical experience. But if we grant epistemic value to mystical experiences, then Sri Aurobindo's entire cosmic narrative, this teleology, instead of being taken as fictional, you can argue that he's describing facts grounded in his own spiritual experience. Okay, that's regarding the third point. The fourth point was about this issue of Sri Aurobindo's understanding of karma. And here I think maybe you or others in the audience may have misunderstood me. I don't want to be claiming that Sri Aurobindo rejects the retributive theory of karma. What I'm claiming is that he claims that karma is retributive, but in a subordinate aspect, but that primarily karma is teleological. So retribution is still an aspect of it. It's just not the most important aspect. So he's still able to explain all the stuff that you're talking about. Why is one baby born with cerebral palsy and et cetera, he'll explain it based on past lives in the karma of people. So he fully accepts that. It's just that even that the retributive aspect of karma is subordinated to this teleological framework. That's all I'm saying. So he accepts retribution, but places it in a subordinate place. And finally, regarding the psychic entity and this issue of, this is, I think, one of the most unique aspects of his theodicy, which he's claimed that each of us has always already consented to participating in this suffering-filled adventure. And Anirban's point question is, well, that seems first of all, it seems a little bit like a sleight of hand. It's easy to say, but how do we prove that? How do we prove that? I think there are two questions you raise about this. The first question is, how do we prove it? The answer, again, has to do with this mystical epistemology issue, right? So if he claims that, remember that he says that there are 4 stages of spiritual experience, and the first stage is the psychic awakening. It's the stage where we realize that we are not the body-mind complex, but we are actually an eternal soul. if through spiritual practice and through God's grace, if we attain that first stage of spiritual experience, that psychic awakening, we should be able to identify with the psychic soul, the psychic entity, which has consented to participate in this cosmic adventure. So that's with regard to how do we know, or how do we prove it? He says each one of you can prove it for yourselves through spiritual practice and by attaining psychic awakening. I think the second point is a really interesting one where you say, well, what if, me, as Anirban or Swami Medhananda says, I've had enough. As Swami Medhananda is the body-mind complex, it's not the soul, right? So, or that gets complicated because of sannyasa, but that's a separate issue. So, but what if I, as the body-mind, say I've had enough? So the thing is, there's an interesting kind of, Sri Aurobindo says, it's true. Many times the superficial ego is going to revolt against what the deeper soul wants or believes in. That's the nature of the kind of conflict between, it says that in the heart center, there's a superficial desire soul, and then there's the real eternal soul behind us. And there's a perpetual conflict. In Kathopanishad, for instance, just as Jesus said that you can choose God or mammon, but not both. Kathopanishad says, Shreyascha preyascha manushyamed stau sampariti vivinakti dhiraha. Shreyo idhiro vipriyaso vranite dhiro mando preyo mando yogshema vranite. So there are these two paths that each person confronts. One is the path of Shreya, of spiritual perfection. The other is the path of enjoyment, which the vast majority of people chase after, right, or pursue. And it's a stark choice. It's in Kierkegaardian terms an either or. It's black and white, and you can go on one or the other path. So in the same way, we have these two identities. The one that we identify with now out of ignorance is our superficial ego, which loves sense pleasures, which loves comfort, which doesn't tolerate much suffering, which doesn't believe in God, all these things. And then there's this deeper soul, which most of us are not aware of, which has the opposite values, which is a portion of the divine and which is constantly encouraging us and prompting us and driving us towards spiritual perfection. What your objection is a kind of natural one, but what Sri Aurobindo would say, I think, is that it's the natural objection of the superficial ego which needs to be transcended through spiritual practice. So thank you so much. Yeah, that was really excellent.
Now I just want a word from the organizers. Should we go for the next meeting, or it's time for? Because questions are profound and. Yes?
We can allow one question from this.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, please.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Khia Roy, from 3rd semester in Philosophy Department.
Nice to meet you.
Sir, I think personally that when we are presupposing that God or the divine is Satchidananda, then the problem is coming that if divine is necessarily Ananda, and if world is nothing but the divine itself, then how can it be the case that there is evil in the world? Sir, I personally think that if we do not presuppose that God is the Satchidananda, that God is Satchidananda, and instead if we think that God is in the process of becoming Satchidananda, I think the problem of evil in the world can be reconciled more easily. Because then the Leela can be considered also as the spiritual journey of the divine himself. Can't we think in that way, sir?
Yeah, okay, it's an interesting point. I mean, let me just clarify what I take to be Sri Aurobindo's position. So your question is, how can there be evil in a world that is supposed to be divine if the divine is understood as Satchidananda? So again, this is the key question, the key philosophical question, which he spends, over 1,000 pages of Life Divine answering. The main answer is that this divine Satchidananda involves itself. So he uses these terms involution and evolution, right? So even in the utmost suffering, even in what seem to be the most egregious and horrendous forms of evil and suffering, in fact, you have the same Satchidananda, but just in an involved form. It's not apparent. So I think what you're saying is that there seems to be a contradiction between the Ananda aspect of Satchidananda and the presence of evil. What Sri Aurobindo says is that what seems to be evil is in fact not. That's also something that Professor Mohanty emphasized, that it's not actually evil. It's just that it seems to us from our ignorant standpoints to be evil. So that's why that's how Sri Aurobindo avoids what seems to be a logical contradiction. He's not admitting actual objective evil into the divine Satchidananda. What he's saying is that all evil is nothing but an involuted and involved form of the divine Ananda itself. So what you were asking, which is interesting, is couldn't we, instead of taking Sri Aurobindo's view, couldn't we say that God is in the process of becoming Satchidananda? In a sense, that's what Sri Aurobindo argues. It's just that he says that Satchidananda is Satchidananda from the beginning, but it's just that Satchidananda is involved. It hasn't manifested externally yet. And so it requires that process of evolution to manifest what it already is. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Can you get,
I think Anurima has a question if we have time.
Yes, sir. So it was fantastic hearing you. I'm Anurima Bhattacharya. I'm teaching philosophy in this department. And actually, in the 2 days program we are having, yesterday we were hearing Vivekananda. Okay, and our special speaker, he was talking of that Vivekananda talks of removal of the ignorance in order to reach perfection. So my question to him also was that if I think of removal of ignorance, then I have to be first conscious of my ignorance. I have to take ignorance very seriously. Now today when you are talking of removal of imperfections in order to move towards the perfection, okay, in order to move towards perfection, I really, I'm convinced this way because in order to move towards perfection, it is very necessary. The path should be not by being conscious of our perfections, but by through removal of the imperfections rather. Okay, so here, I mean, I like to, I like to take your comments from that. Do you find that the two persons, Vivekananda and Aurobindo, are approaching towards perfection in different ways? I mean, one is approaching perfection through being conscious of divinity, the attributes of divinity, and the other is approaching divinity or spirituality through the imperfections or the, through the, all you were talking of the evil factors. Okay, so are the two approaches of the two persons in contradiction, or they are different, or they are opposite in nature? This is my first question. And second question is that when you are talking of this removal of the imperfections and the psychic being develops or grows by removing these imperfections, are you having as, you talked of the spiritual Hegelianism. Okay, and so I was thinking that you take, do Aurobindo takes as a principle anyway for the psychic being to move towards the perfection, the dialectic in the course of the growing of psychic beings. I mean, the psychic being grows following the principle of dialectics anyway, or it's just the negation of, the imperfections. I mean, is the principle of dialectics anywhere coming here? These are the two questions.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, so regarding your first question about sort of, is Swami Vivekananda's approach to the problem of evil different from Sri Aurobindo's? That's a good question, and I mean, it's a kind of, it would take a long time to discuss it in detail, but what I would say is, I didn't attend yesterday's session, but I would actually, if what the presenter yesterday was saying is that Swami Vivekananda encourages us to remove our ignorance, I don't think that's correct, to be honest. I would characterize Swami Vivekananda's position differently. I think what he said is that each of us is already divine, and each of us is already a knower of Brahman, of the divine. So the knowledge is already within us. The problem is we suffer because we haven't manifested that innate knowledge. So all that we have to do, we don't have to remove our ignorance. We're not ignorant, we're actually knowers. We have to purify our minds in order to manifest the knowledge that is already within us. So that's why what's necessary is spiritual practice. The aim of all spiritual practice is self-purification. It's purification of body and mind. Through purification of body and mind, we remove the kind of layers of dirt, metaphorical dirt or dust that's covering our innate divinity, and it just shines forth. That innate knowledge of the divine shines forth. So if we take Swami Vivekananda's view to be that, I think it's perfectly in line with what Sri Aurobindo teaches. And I don't think it's a coincidence, because I think most of you know that when he was in jail in Alipur for a year for his political activities, Sri Aurobindo claimed that Swami Vivekananda came to him in jail daily for a fortnight, for 2 weeks, and came to him and taught him high-level meditation techniques about supermind. So it's not, and he was very strongly influenced by both Ramakrishna and by Vivekananda. So I see them as kind of adopting a very similar approach, the approach being that we already have divine knowledge innate within us, and all spiritual practice is oriented toward removing the impurities or imperfections from our nature, to realize that really impurities, not even imperfections, we're already perfect. So, but we purify ourselves through spiritual practice, and what's left is the knowledge, which we already have. That's regarding the first point. And the second point, you asked about whether the journey of the individual psychic being, the soul within us, is a dialectical one. It's an interesting question. I mean, it depends on what you mean by dialectics, and of course, you know, I don't know if you mean it in a Hegelian sense or Fichte or something, but yeah, I mean, you know, I myself called this spiritual adventure a spiritual Hegelianism for a reason, because I do think that there are similarities, right? What Hegel calls, in one place he says, in the Phenomenology of Spirit, he says that he calls the journey of spirit a pathway of despair, Weg der Verzweiflung in German. So, and I think that resonates strongly with Sri Aurobindo's theodicy, the idea that it's through suffering and through the negative, right? Hegel also has this famous phrase, which Slavoj Žižek uses as the title of one of his books, tarrying with the negative, verweilen mit dem Negativ. So you have to tarry with the negative, with the capital N, in order to arrive at the highest divine nature. And so I do think that you can see it, you can discern a dialectical structure in Sri Aurobindo's understanding of the cosmic adventure. He doesn't use the term dialectic, and I'm not sure that he was aware of Hegel's work, but I think interesting work, comparative work can be done with Hegel and Sri Aurobindo. Thank you for that question.
Okay, yeah.
I think in one word we can respond to your query, that this, you are aware of imperfection as imperfection because of the embedded perfection in you. The embedded perfection, sense of perfection in you makes you recognize imperfection as imperfection. As long as the light of knowledge is not lit or dimly lit, you mistake your imperfection to your perfection. So your mistakes multiply. That is why Socrates also said, knowledge of ignorance, beginning of the journey. Yes. So because of the perfection embedded in you, you recognize the imperfection as imperfection and try to overcome it. So in this dialectics, you can call it existential dialectics, where the negative is sublimated by the advent of the positive. So that is how also we can look at it. Basically, we are divine, as Swamiji has said. Basically, we are all omniscient. For example, you give the example of a glass, a mirror. It does not reflect if the dust it is covered with dust or soil. The moment you rub it up, you take it off, then it reflects its original nature. Similarly, that you are knowledgeable at the core, you know everything at the core, everyone is omniscient at the core. This is realized in the course of moving through different wrongs in the existential dialectics. That is what is termed as the spiritual quest or spiritual journey. Now I think we are almost, the time is running out, and I would like to, the organizers to take this session ahead to this conclusive end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Swami, for the wonderful talk. It has really provoked many good questions. In fact, if time permits, we can have more talks on it, but due to shortage of time, I'm afraid we cannot entertain any more questions. It was a very, very wonderful talk. And I would also like to thank Professor Mohanty for the beautiful summarization of the entire talk. It was a very synoptic view which covers the core of the lecture. Thank you so very much. Now with this, we have come to the end of this second session of the second day of the World Philosophy. We will quickly proceed to the next program, that is the valedictory program. And here in this valedictory program, I would like to request Professor Jyotish Bhasak to kindly say the vote of thanks. Thank you, sir, for accepting our request to say a vote of thanks for this program. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramting. With this, actually, we are coming to an end of the celebration of 19th edition of World Philosophy Day. But before I propose a vote of thanks, I would like to say a few words about this day. Actually, this is the 19th edition of World Philosophy Day. And interestingly, it was to be held on 19th of November. It is very interesting fact. And what is more interesting, actually, the World Philosophy Day began in 2002, and in 2005, UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Cultural and Organizations announced that it will be held every year on third Thursday of November. And perhaps it was done keeping in mind the birthday of the great philosopher Socrates. So we are almost 50 days late, but it is unique for the reason that actually every year we celebrated it as a one-day seminar or a one-day talk. But this year it was 2 days talk. So this is an interesting fact. And for the students, particularly for the students of first semester who have not, I think most of them have not visited the department, but they have attended the program through a webinar. So there is one interesting fact, and this is for the first time perhaps it is happening in this way. And the talk that the speeches that I was hearing from yesterday, which began with Professor K.K. Bakchi's lecture, and then Raghunath Das lecture, then today Professor Mohanty's lecture, and then Swami Madhanandaji's lecture. I was thinking about UNESCO's mission. Actually, this year, if we see the theme of their celebration, that we find that what they're inviting us to do, that rather the whole world, they are inviting us to reflect on the meaning of the current pandemic, and which underlines the need that even more than before to resort to philosophical reflections in order to face the multiple challenges that we are undergoing. So it is very interesting that if we carefully listen the speeches, actually they have shown us some paths how to overcome the challenge that we are facing. Actually, there is somewhere I have read this, that UNESCO, one important member of the UNESCO, director of the UNESCO, he was saying once that there can be no UNESCO without philosophy. It is almost like sometimes if we go through the websites of the different companies, everybody writes a few lines about their philosophy. So UNESCO is almost saying, following this tune, that there can be no UNESCO without philosophy. So these are some interesting facts about World Philosophy Day. But now when I come to propose a vote of thanks, then definitely I shall take the name of the Vice Chancellor of the North Bengal University, or rather of our university, who consented to be the chief guest of this program, but for some reason or other, perhaps for his some very busy engagement, he could not attend the program, but he helped in every possible way. Whenever I have come to know from the organizers that whenever they sought any sort of help from the university, he was very much forthcoming. Even we, all of us, those who are the faculty of the department, they know that every year whenever we went to him for some even financial assistance, he did not question even once, why do you want more money? Rather, every year he augmented the amount, the financial assistance that we wanted, and he himself came. He encouraged us. He was so busy, even he sometimes spoke 1 or 2 lines, but still he attended the program. So it is really, sir, we are so grateful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor and other officials, also those who helped in various ways for logistics and everything. Then we are thankful to Indian Council of Philosophical Research. Barring 1 year, since 2002, every year they have extended their financial assistance. And interestingly, this year, this crisis has been turned into an advantage by our organizers, that they have requested the chairman of the ICPR to attend the program, and he attended and he spent considerable time yesterday with us. So we are thankful to Professor R.C. Sinha, also Professor Ramesh Chandra Sinha, for not only for extending financial assistance, but also be with us for quite some time. He encouraged us with his speech, and interestingly, he said that every day is a philosophy day. Rather, it is very interesting, and that is why we are celebrating not celebrating the day only once in a year, rather month-long celebration it is. Then I would like to thank our speakers and resource persons, Professor K.K. Bagchi. Professor K.K. Bagchi is quite old now, but still he agreed upon to speak. And the way he spoke yesterday, I was really astonished that he was so youthful now, still now, the way he was speaking, the way he was remembering everybody's name yesterday, taking everybody's name. It is really very interesting. Then Raghunath Raghunath is a member, rather in a sense, a faculty of our department still now. He came to the department only for giving his speech. He did not remain confined within his house. In spite of this pandemic, when everybody is saying repeatedly that don't go out of home if it is not absolutely required, he thought that it is the department is his home, and he came to the department, spoke from there, then he chaired from there, everything. So we are grateful to Raghunath for your kind presence yesterday and for your deliberation also. And Professor Aditya Mohanty, I remember Aditya Mohanty, he came, perhaps I saw him sometime in, I think, 2000 or 2001, when he came to our department for delivering a lecture in a refresher course organized by the department. I attended his class, and I was remembering, even after that time, I think at least twice he visited our department. And today is illuminating lecture. Really, sir, we enjoyed your lecture, and even the summary you have done of the Maharaj's lecture, it was so beautiful. Then Swami Madananda ji, his lecture was also very illuminating. His presence, his lecture really encourages us every time. And then if I want to thank others, then first I will come to our students, because this entire program is for our students. Is they, or rather, if they are present in the department, they keep everything ready for the program. So this time they are not here, they are at their home, but still they attended the program. And Ramthing was saying today that yesterday there was around 400 viewers in YouTube. So I understand that most of our students, not only current students, even some ex-students have watched this program. Then if I come to our departments, then departmental colleagues, actually everybody helped in some way or other. I was seeing Mayank, right from yesterday, I am seeing throughout the time he is with Ramthing in the control room and helping in so many ways. So right from senior most member Kanti, my friend Kantilal, the Professor Dash, he was also present in the meeting. I saw right from yesterday, and from Kanti to Mayank, everybody is helping in various ways. And our 3 pilots means it is 3 pilots means head of the department. He was also in the control room, but now I am not finding him. But still, he helped in so many ways. And 2 pilots, they are constantly watching and managing the things. So really, they have done a lot of works. And organizing a program does not mean it is 2 days work or 2 days labor. The whole starts moving at least a month ago or even before that, and they took all these pains to organize the program. And I would like to tell all of them that your organization was really an immaculate one. we could not find a single spot in your arrangements. So we are really thankful to you. And then our departmental staff, Priyanka, then Balaramda, then Gautam and others also helped in various ways. So we are thankful to them also. And most importantly, though I am mentioning them at the last, but they made immense contribution. It is the computer center and the personnel of the computer center. I was seeing throughout the time they are moving around and they are creating the link, they are doing that thing. They have given entire dispensation to us. This whatever is available at their disposal, they have given it to us for our use. And of course, the devices that we are using for making the things nearer to us and making it possible to organize the programs. So I would like to thank all of them for making it possible. And of course, those who are attending from different colleges and other interested persons, we are grateful to them because by becoming a member of Philosophical Fraternity, I think you are also contributing to the UNICEF's mission of critical thinking, learning critical thinking, inculcating critical thinking. It is also some sort of contribution you are making in some way or other. So we are grateful to all of you, sir. So with these few words, I would like to end my vote of thanks. Now it is over to Ramting for his announcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So let's stop, ne? Ne? What about this? Let's stop this. End this stream. Yeah. Again.